a whole bunch of jokes, but I just kept them all in.
I just don't, I don't
All in.
okay. I try to pretend like I have pictures, but I don't. Oh, I can't do that. All right.
It's Elizabeth, Andrew.
Good afternoon. The time is now
How we doing today?
5:07 p.m. on July 5th, 2023. And this meeting of the DC State Board of Education working session is now called to order. This month's working session is being held in person at the Marion S. Berry Junior Building. However, in-person attendance is limited to members of the staff of the State Board and guests. This working session is being live streamed on the State Board's YouTube page for members of the public to attend. The State Board will continue holding working sessions and public meetings in person. Please visit sboe.dc.gov to learn how to submit and or present testimony at a meeting of the State Board. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a forum. Executive Director Butler, please call the roll.
Representative Bernstein. Present. Representative Jones Burgess. Representative Wages. Representative Washington. Representative Williams. Representative Chang.
Present.
Representative Goulet. Representative O'Leary.
Here.
Representative Henderson.
Present.
Representative Best. Representative Thompson.
Present.
Representative Reed.
Present.
Madam President, you have a forum.
Thank you. A quorum has been determined and the State Board will now proceed with the meeting. Leadership report is first up. So again, I want to welcome everyone to our July 5th weekly State Board of Education working session. Members, earlier today, I emailed a leadership report. We have only, just so people know, we do continue to share all of the meeting links and so you can go into them at any time, but all of our meetings are not monthly. So in June, the two meetings that have updated notes for you all are the meeting with the DME and the meeting with OSCE. Many of the things from the meeting with OSCE, because it has been a very busy weeks in June, have already been covered, given our vote on social studies. What is that? Only 2 weeks ago now. And I would say some of the remaining items that are coming, we'll get some updates on during OSCE's presentation today. And then, of course, some of the updates at our next leadership meeting with OSCE about the internal scheduling, so we can figure out how best to sequence for future standards review. Our meeting with the DME also largely focused on many of the social studies things. I'm not going to say it's open quite yet because I know that OSCE is working hard to move into implementation, but it is not things that is worth repeating for the public and given the sake of time. The other thing I would like to highlight that the DME has going on now, which I'm sure you all are well aware of, is of course updates around like the boundary study and the master plan. Those are like the big buckets of those meetings and updates. There are other things which are like board specific. Some of them having to do with like our processes internal in the email. I'm happy to take questions about either of those meetings or anything in the leadership report. Any questions?
Is that, there was reference to a budget briefing from DME, is that still?
Oh, that's still on the table. It's still in process. I don't have a date yet, so I didn't include it. My guess is either Director Butler has a date in her report because it's something our faculty coordinating on. So I don't know if you want to say that for your report or answer that now.
Well, I can answer it now. We do not have a date. I am working with Claire to finalize a couple of date options that work best for her team. And then we'll share those dates with you all so that we can do up the budget essentially.
Other questions? All right, I'm now going to turn to Executive Director Butler for other updates and her report.
Thank you, President Thompson. Good evening, members of the DC State Board of Education. June was a very busy month, as you all know. But to first start off for our internal agency thing, Roma Battle, our budget officer, and I met with the new AFO for the Ed Cluster, Siobhan Smith, and so we reestablished that relationship. It is no longer Paris, so it is Ms. Vaughn Smith, and she's great. I participated in a panel of DC education leaders for Ed Pioneers, which was exciting and fun. It's so cool. Jen and Kathleen have participated in the SBOE staff working group focused on education standards. The SBOE team kicked off my annual website update. Just a special note, if you've gotten an email or a plug to update something that is on the website, please do so. Malaya has us on a strict timeline to get us up and ready before the new school year starts. So that all of our information and materials will be updated for the public. With this in mind, just for the website, we are planning professional board photos for July or August. You will get a date to choose. At this time, we'll be taking official board photos, including individual and group photos. So please be on the lookout for that email, because those will also go on our updated website. The team also wrapped up this search for our next round of policy and communication fellows. We'll be onboarding these individuals in July and August. The state board staff will kick off our education speaker series this week with Chancellor Fairby. So the team is really excited about that. We sent them 8 questions that really focus on them as leaders, and then helping our staff understand the local education landscape to really highlight what does leadership trajectories look like for those roles and positions, and what are the philosophies and experiences of the leaders who lead our education ecosystem here in the district. All of the executives in the education cluster have confirmed their participation, so we are super excited about that opportunity. Next, our staff has already begun to plan for the fall. You should have received a calendar invite for September 10th. We will be tabling at the front entrance inside the national baseball game that Sunday to welcome families and community members to know more about the state board. We really hope you all can join us to raise awareness about the state board and to meet many of your constituents. Please be on. We have also confirmed the fall board retreat for September 16th. So that is also in your inbox. Please look out for an email soliciting your input on topics and focus areas for the retreat. Lastly, the SBO team works hard to ensure that each of you have what you need to do your best work. Continue to reach out and ask for assistance as you may need it. But more importantly, please join me in wishing Dr. Dan Fleischer happy birthday today. He is a dedicated and hardworking member of our team, and so we just want to say happy birthday, Dr. Fleischer. President Thompson, this is my report.
Okay, so first, happy birthday, Darren.
Thank you.
Does anybody have questions or for the birthday dinner for executive director Butler or first birthday speaker? Hearing that.
I got one thing. The Nationals game is when the board is going to be presenting stuff. There's also another one too, right?
So yeah, the September 10th date is the date where we'll be tabling at the entrance. So as people come in, we will be giving them swag or flyers and mailers, let them know who the state board is, greeting them. And then on September 18th, the Nationals have agreed to host the first meeting of the school year for our student advisory committee. So that is exciting, and we'll be hosting their first meeting at the ballpark.
This is Representative Reed. Did I hear September 16th for the retreat date?
Yes, it was emailed out last month at the end of May.
Gotcha. I was about to put it in my calendar and I noticed it's Rosh Hashanah. I'm not sure how Jewish holidays work, but I just wanted to raise that as it could be a conflict.
It will be a conflict. We were trying to get.
September
It's
16th.
September 16th, Rosh Hashanah is October 16th. But maybe I know it's sometimes hard to hear. So I would defer back to the email, but the date is September 16th.
Okay, I guess our calendar is lying to me then. Thank you.
Okay,
We will confirm.
We'll confirm.
Just let everyone know for sure, and if it is, we'll make an adjustment.
Any other questions? All right, I am now pleased to turn over the board's time to the Office of the State Superintendent for Education. We're gonna hear plans on the DC report card and financial literacy standards. The goals of our discussion are to align on a timeline and process for reviewing and approving updates to the DC report card and to discuss the timeline and process for drafting and implementing financial literacy standards. I'm pleased to turn over the next 30 minutes of our meeting to Alex G, the Director of Strategic and Operational Planning, Elizabeth Ross, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, and Andrew Gall, Deputy Chief of Staff. ASI team.
Thank you very much for having us to your working session this evening. I know that many of you are likely coming back from a long July 4th weekend, but we have two really important topics to discuss with you. So we really appreciate your presence and engagement. First, we will discuss the DC school report card. We will provide you with some background information, including previous work with the board and key pieces of information to keep in mind as we begin this engagement process. Then we will outline our proposed engagement timeline, including our vision for what fall engagement may look like, and provide some next steps on our work on the report card. Our goal with bringing this work before you today is to align on the timeline and process for approving updates to the school report card regarding content and format. Please note that this conversation will naturally, as you all are curious, right? It'll make you maybe want to jump ahead to some specific questions about the content and format. Will it include X? Can we put Z here on the page? I understand that urge, but would just really ask you to understand we're not getting into that level of detail tonight. Rather, we're seeking to align on the engagement process to ensure that the board and ASI have a clear outline of what steps we will take to receive public feedback and reach a timely vote or point for a vote. Next, we will turn to financial literacy. We will provide a little bit of background information on why we are seeking to create financial literacy standards. We will lay out a timeline for standing up financial literacy standards, and we will preview which experts we intend to work with in developing the standards. Though you may have questions throughout the presentation, we ask that you hold all questions and comments for both presentations until the end. For both topics, we are seeking board feedback and alignment. Your feedback will be really valued, and we look forward to hearing all your thoughts on these topics and in terms of the timelines and processes. So I will now turn the floor over to a new ASI employee who I obviously need to introduce all of you to. It is our Director of Strategic and Operational Planning in our Department of Data and Analysis and Research, Alexander Chu.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, State Board, for having me. It's very interesting to be on the side of the table, but I appreciate you welcoming me back. As Andrew said, I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the work on the DC School Report Card, largely making sure that we align on timeline and process for that work, and really try to come to consensus on the areas of engagement that we will be doing as we think about what a new and enhanced DC School Report Card will look like. Before we get to kind of that discussion point, I did want to just paint and remind folks of where we've been related to the DC School Report Card. So the State Board, as you all know, you do have statutory authority to approve both the categories and the format of the DC School Report Card. That work does date back to February 2018, when you all first approved the content and format for the current version of the DC School Report Card. The content itself, you approved about 60 different data elements. You approved a format that was going to be online in nature, mobile friendly, printable, for stakeholders to access in different languages. And so that is what we're coming to you today to think about what is the content and the format of an updated and enhanced school report going to look like. In January 2022, some of you maybe also remember that your predecessors and some of you on the current board passed a series of recommendations related both to the school accountability system as well as to the DC School Report Card. About half of those actually related to the DC School Report Card. And again, as we move forward with this work, we will be focusing on the DC school report card aspects. Then in July of 2022, you all approved the updated ESSA accountability plan. And OSSI subsequently submitted that to the Department of Education for approval. The plan has been approved. Under that plan, OSSI has committed to removing the star rating, amongst other things, engaging with the public and you all on kind of 3 areas pursuant to the resolution. The presentation of any summative score, inclusion of teacher workforce data, and things related to school climate. And so that's largely what brings OSSI here to the table today. Bernice, could you be next? Thank you so much. So as we think about kind of what's ahead, there are a few areas that just want to put at the front of the conversation before we jump into a timeline. So really, in order for OSSI and the state board to hear and really identify any possible enhancements, additions that we want to see for the DC school report card, I think we're proposing 2 things at this time. One, the distribution of a public facing survey to really ensure that stakeholders have the opportunity to engage on what enhancements, what content, what things might be missing, what do they like. And I also want to draw the attention to, when we say stakeholders here, I think it's really important to note that the primary user of the DC school report card are families, are community members. And so how are we making sure that families, parents, community members are able to access the report card and have the information on that they need? And then I think the second piece that we hope to do is kind of co-host a series of virtual or in-person engagement sessions with the state board on a variety of kind of key topics, which we'll get to later on. And we hope we can get to alignment on that. Second thing I wanted to make clear, and I think Andrew kind of alluded to this, we do have kind of a tight timeline on this work. So in order for us to make sure that we deliver an updated school report card with content and format by next December 2024, that would mean that the state board would need to approve any updates to content and format no later than February of next year. So you all might be thinking February to December, that's a lot of time. But I'm looking at Jacques right now because Jacques actually sat on the ESSA task force and was kind of more engaged in the previous work. But I think Jacques probably is familiar, or Representative Patterson, my apologies, is familiar with kind of the process it took to get from conceptualization to actual development. And then the third thing, just to call your attention to, and just to remind you, is that the work that we're doing here today, again, is going to be on the content and format of the DC school report card. The state board in July of last year did approve updates to the accountability system, and this work will not include updates to the accountability system, which has already been approved by the state board in July of last year and subsequently approved by the Department of Education. And so next slide, please, Bernice. So this next slide is probably maybe potentially the most interesting for some of you. It is a timeline of how we see the work in months ahead. Two things on here. The items in blue are purely contextual. Those relate to the 2023 DC school report card. So the work that is currently happening right now to make sure that by December of this year, we have an updated website with the updated data. And then the items in red are related to the new DC school report card, which we hope to launch no later than December 2024. I will do a very quick voiceover of the items, but not into too much detail. We're in July. OSSI is here presenting to you all on alignment and consensus. We hope to return in September to share some more updates over the course of the fall and winter, thinking through stakeholder engagement with you all as it relates to a public-facing survey, some engagement sessions. All of that should lead us to the end of this year, December-ish, where we can come back to the table and say, this is what we've heard from folks. What is possible? What can we consider? Leading OSSI to a place where we can present the state board with a series of our recommendations for you all to consider for approval, again, no later than February. And then that does give us the spring and summer of 2024 to really build out the tool and make sure that it is the tool that the family stakeholders, et cetera, are really looking for. So that's the timeline. And then next slide, please, Bernice. And so Andrew alluded to this as well. Kind of a current vision that OSSI has right now. And again, we are here to kind of welcome your feedback and thoughts on this. But over the fall, OSSI is kind of proposing to co-host maybe 3 distinct engagement sessions on the topic of the DC school report card in this particular order too. So one focused on the content of the DC school report card. Again, like what is working well, what is missing, what do stakeholders like, what could be enhanced. The second would be on the presentation of any summative score. And just to clarify, when we say summative score here, just as a reminder, the calculation of a summative score is a federal requirement. So we're not saying that the summative score is not going to be calculated. OSSE has committed that the star rating is no longer a part of the DC school report card. And we're not suggesting that stars will be replaced with smiley faces or apples, but there could be some other sort of visual indicator that we might want to put on the DC school report card to help families and parents better understand the data at hand. And then the third item that we'd like to engage on is the overall visual elements and features related to the report card. So how do we take those two items and make sure that it is a functioning tool, whether it has a comparison feature or other things that is fully built out and accessible. Again, open to the specifics related to how the sessions are, whether virtual, in person, location, and the cadence. There is a thought we could host one every month, September, October, November. We could do them more closely aligned, but there's a lot of, I think, room and opportunity for discussion there. Next slide, please. And so then as we close and just talk through next steps on OSSE's end, we will kind of continue to present to you all on the DC school report card, progress with the current version, the 2023 version, and how that's going. Continued discussion on kind of our collaborative engagement process and the materials and resources that would need to be developed to make sure that those successfully get implemented in the fall and winter. And then eventually all leading up to OSSE delivering a series of recommendations for the state board's approval, again, no later than February of next year. And then at the same time, OSSE does ask that the state board really just share ideas with us. What excites you about this work? Where do you all want to focus in this work? And thinking back to the resolution that you all passed in January 2022 and those 15 recommendations, like what still resonates there? Is that place, are some of those recommendations still accurate? Just such that OSSE has been informing some of its current work from that resolution. So I will stop there. Again, as Andrew said, we're going to hold questions until the end, but I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Elizabeth Ross to talk about financial literacy.
Thanks so much, Alex. Great to see everyone again. And Bernice, if you could move us on to the next slide. I'm here tonight to talk about financial literacy. OSSE is in the early stages of our work to develop and adopt financial literacy standards, standalone financial literacy standards. These are not standards that the district has formally had before, but we know there is clear interest from our LEAs, from our educators, and from our students in having a strong set of financial literacy standards that will help ensure that students have the strong financial literacy skills that they need to succeed in school, but even more importantly in life. We are going to build on the economic standards that we included in our recently adopted social studies standards. We want to be sure that this work is not duplicative, but instead building on that strong base. And we are paying careful attention to what we have already heard from the public in this space. About 10 months ago, there was a public hearing on financial literacy standards with we heard from a number of public witnesses that this is an area of keen interest and the right next space for OSSE to move into in terms of our standards development work. Next slide, please, Bernice. Our timeline is built on the work that we did with State Board during the social studies process in that it is iterative. However, it is a much quicker timeline because we're building from a base of strong national financial literacy standards in a way that we weren't necessarily with the social studies standards. And so we don't envision that we'll be developing these standards whole cloth. However, it's critically important to us that they do reflect the needs of district students. And so you'll see that there is a significant time dedicated to stakeholder engagement. We are in July 2023, the second step on our timeline where we're presenting this proposed timeline and our proposed experts to SBOE during our July working session. We have already convened an internal working group at OSSE and begun working to identify and reaching out to experts. In July and August of this year, we're engaging those experts in drafting materials for stakeholder engagement, which will be kicking off in August and September. That is deliberative because we want to be sure that we are really centering educator and student perspectives, and those perspectives are much easier to get when students and educators are back in the classroom rather than off enjoying a very well-deserved summer holiday. Then in September, we'll be discussing stakeholder feedback with SBOE during that September SBOE working session in order to inform our standards drafting. In September and October, we'll be drafting those financial literacy standards. In November and December, publishing those standards for public comment. In January, working with educators and experts to respond to feedback from public comment and updating the draft financial literacy standards. In February, presenting SBOE with updated draft financial literacy standards, and in March, presenting final financial literacy standards so that we can be prepared to support schools in implementing these standards in the 24-25 school year. Next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, we are in the expert engagement stage, and we are centering our expert engagement on experts from academic institutions. There are a lot of players in the financial literacy space, many of whom have specific interests outside of educating. There are many. That's okay.
Put the computer on mute.
No echo, good. All right. We are centering our expert engagement on experts from academic institutions, specifically because there are many individuals in the financial literacy space, including those who have interests outside of educating our students. And so we want to be sure that we are not working in particular with one or more financial institutions that may have a financial interest in making sure that our students know, for example, about certain financial products. We are aiming to assemble a panel of 4 to 6 experts, and we're interested in some feedback. On the next slide, I'll talk through where we are with that engagement. And the experts with whom we have already engaged have highly recommended connecting with leads of teachers to provide input regarding the financial literacy standards. So we are really excited and planning and preparing for that engagement. Next slide, please. To date, we have connected with 4 experts, and we actually have a few more that are confirmed as of Friday, subsequent to when this slide deck was completed. So we have Dr. Anand Mari, who's the interim provost and executive vice president for academic affairs and professor of educational studies at Ball State University. He has a long resume, as do all of our experts, and has done this work with other states and is really excited to be working with us. He also brings to the table some expertise at the New York branch of the Federal Reserve, and so we're glad and grateful for his perspective. Next, we have Dr. Abdullah Albarani. He's the interim associate dean and associate professor of business at Northern Kentucky University. He has a specific interest in increasing access to financial literacy and economics education. Next, we have Dr. Carly Urban, who's an associate professor of economics at Montana State University. She has a focus on public economics and state mandated financial education data. And next, we have Rebecca Maxey, who is the director and principal investigator at the University of Chicago Financial Education Initiative. She has experience leading the research and development of a high school financial literacy course. We also recently confirmed a number of individuals at Howard University who have leadership and professor roles in the Howard University Center for Financial Excellence, including Dr. Curtis Kidd Telema and Dr. Cheryl Evans. They have looped in a number of their colleagues, and we are meeting with them next week. There is a national expert at GW who is in the middle of moving from GW to Stanford, so we were unable to engage her this summer given her other time commitments. And if we could go to the next slide, we are currently awaiting a response from additional academic experts, including at the University of the District of Columbia, and we welcome in particular feedback from SBOE on any of the content that I have just covered, but particularly whether there are additional experts within your networks or that you recommend us getting in touch with. As we're in the early stages of doing this work, we want to be sure that we are getting input from the individuals who we should be bringing to the table. And we anticipate engaging these experts at 2 points in time. One, before we put our draft standards out to the public for public comment. And then two, once we receive public comment, in order to, for example, determine how to weigh, public commenter X recommended that we go with option A, public commenter Y recommended that we go with option B, should we go with option A, B, or C? We found in the social studies context that our experts were quite useful in that case and hope to engage these individuals in the same way. That's the end of my formal remarks tonight, but I'm really happy for feedback on anything that I just covered and in particular on that experts piece. Thank you.
All right. Are there questions? Okay, so which members have questions? One, I think that's a 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm gonna come back around. So I'm not gonna remember, and you all are not gonna remember. Representative Henderson was 1.
Do you want to do both topics at once?
You can ask on either topic.
So just a comment first on the engagement for the report card. I think virtual and in person, I think we should do both. And also just to get ahead of translating materials so that we're ready with that right off the bat. And then on the financial literacy, one of my takeaways from the social studies experts was I thought it would be very important to have a balance between like subject matter experts and then curriculum experts. And in this case, I think you have the one person who has done a high school curriculum. But maybe maybe to identify 1 or 2 more people who have written curriculum before. And then also, the federal financial regulators, I think, have done a fair amount of work on financial literacy. And maybe that's more to the curriculum and materials part, but it might be worth looking at what they've done.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Mine is of course around the report card. So I'm happy to hear that we're not going to be drawn out series of things on it because the task force was a lot. So definitely know we're not having a task force. I want to confirm that, right? We're not doing a big drawn out thing of the task force, right?
Yeah, I think Representative Patterson, I think at this time, it doesn't make sense to do that. I think we have to be tight with our timeline. Yeah.
Okay. And then just secondly, as far as when I look at the September or really the fall, winter, are you guys going to present like a mock-up type of report card? How do we get into the actual components and stuff like that? How will that be presented?
So I think I understand what you're saying, Representative Patterson. So I think our hope would be that at the September working session or possibly the following, that we'd be able to come and share some, whether it's like mock-ups or screen shares of what we envision or what is currently the status quo and kind of how we might want to change it. Is that what you're?
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of asking.
So there's a place to work from.
Yeah, so we have something to work from. I know that we talked in previous group that we had that was working on it, that approved parts of it. They had some ideals of what they wanted it to look like, and it might be helpful to go back and look at those. But some mock-ups that we had that we kind of presented so that we have something that we're kind of working from and that we can kind of collaboratively kind of start agreeing on that we're talking to the community about. So I just want to make sure that we kind of did that. And then we'll also be talking about, I know there has to be a summative score, which we approved and everything, which is a very controversial aspect of it. At that time, we'll also be talking about the placement of where the summative score will be placed as far as on the, whether it's screen or whatever the case may be. Some people say they don't want it up front because it's an indictment on the school if the school doesn't do well or those type of things. So at that point, we'll also be talking about the placement of the summative score.
Yes, that's correct, Representative Patterson.
Those are my questions.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I'll follow up on both of their reviews. So in terms of like the summative score, is there a requirement that there be a summative score, or is that a choice that we can make? Because I remember so I wanted to follow up on that one first.
So, Representative Williams, the summative score and the calculation of it is a federal requirement under ESSA. And so OSSI as the SCA, we are required to calculate a summative score to help us identify the lowest performing schools in the district. And so it is a requirement.
But it's only a requirement for the lowest performing schools in the district. It's not a requirement for all schools, correct?
So it is a requirement to calculate the score to identify the lowest performing schools. And so by nature of math, I think I turned it color, but it's like you would not be able to calculate the score just for the bottom 5%. You need all the schools to actually identify that score.
That makes sense. But then choosing as to whether we show the summative score for all the schools is not actually the ESSA requirement, correct? It's just a requirement that we report out the lowest 5% of schools.
Yes, that is my understanding. I'll get back to you on that one, but it's my understanding. And so I think thinking back to kind of the three areas that we're working on, I think the second one kind of around the presentation of the summative score, and to Representative Patterson's point, you know, how the summative score lands on the DC school report card would be part of that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important that I think we gain clarity as to what we're actually required to do under ESSA, and then what like our parameters are and how to present it. I did want, my only other question, and I do underscore everything that Representative Henderson said, because I think there were a lot of lessons learned for social studies that can be useful in this, was just around engaging educators for financial literacy. So I saw that the plan to do that was like early fall. So can you say more kind of what OSSI's thinking is and how the state board can support that work?
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And we are in the early stages of planning. So if there are things that that you want to bring forward for our consideration, please know we are really excited and happy for that. We're planning to do two different kinds of engagement, one of which is a survey, which will go out broadly, and we'll work with some channel partners in order to make sure that gets in the hands of educators and LEA leaders, so that we can make sure that everyone has an opportunity to give us feedback. And the next is a series of stakeholder engagement sessions. Not every DC school is currently offering financial literacy, and so we are interested in doing a sample and working both to educators at schools that are offering financial literacy, and then educators at schools who are not offering financial literacy. And similar to the feedback that Representative Henderson gave to Alex about using both virtual and in-person formats, we do tend to take advantage of both virtual and in-person formats. You know, there's something really unique about being in an in-person environment in terms of being able to engage individuals. At the same time, we appreciate how very, very busy individuals are. And, you know, we pay careful attention to the numbers of people that show up to things, and we have found much higher engagement rates when there's a virtual option.
I appreciate that. And I think the only thing I'd encourage OSSI to kind of keep in mind with that is just like the timing of that outside of the school day. Because I know that like just want to be engaged in that work, and just hard to kind of sometimes get the time off if it starts in August or September and people are kind of back to work. So if they can be like nights to the degree and extent possible, then I think that would garner more engagement.
Point very, very well taken. And that's a lesson we've certainly learned and tried to use in some of our other stakeholder engagement. So we'll definitely carry that forward here. Thank you.
Yeah. I just got a question about the financial literacy. When I first came on the board, our students brought that up. It was really the first time that it had been brought up about how deprived they felt of not understanding how to write a check or or a bank account, or those kinds of financial literacy that they never learned. And I would imagine if we went around the table right now, that there's got to be somebody besides me that really didn't learn anything about financial literacy until they got paid one time. I think that in some way, if you can work the voice of students into this panel, because I think that information, as we know from our students, they provide the best information about what they're not getting. All these experts, because the country's filled with experts, but they don't understand about students. And we're talking about students. So I just wanted to throw that out, but also not throw it out, put it out there. Is this an elective course?
Yeah, so we have a lot of work underway.
Okay, and I may be talking, because you didn't want to hear about those kinds of questions. So I just wanted to know, because when you're planning as a teacher, you're planning backwards from what you want to teach, what you want the students to know, and then you figure out how to get to the information to them. And I think the first thing that we have to know is who's being taught and what is being taught, and then how to do that. But the thing about, and how many systems have y'all talked to that have courses in financial literacy in high schools? Because we're talking about a high school course, right?
Correct. So there are a number of different ways of structuring these standards, and that's part of the work that we're doing this summer as we put together standards materials. We've talked to a number of different jurisdictions, and there is some work happening right now across the country and across the globe to develop financial literacy assessments for 4th graders, 8th graders, and 12th graders. So certainly it is possible to think about financial literacy in elementary school, in middle school, and then of course it's most commonly thought of and taught in high school. Currently in our DC system, financial literacy is not a required course for high school graduation. And so where it is being taught, it's being taught as an elective.
Okay, thank you.
Great question.
And I also have one question about the social studies standards. No, that's all.
No, this can be your last question.
No,
Okay,
it's
this is the
okay.
last
It's
one. Okay. All right, next round, I know we have one person on the phone, and I see a hand already up, so that can be 5, 6, Representative Shane, 7, Representative Lane. All right, then I'll close it out. Representative Reed.
Good afternoon, everyone. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you back in a different capacity. So welcome. So I'll start with financial literacy. Thank you, Elizabeth. I was excited. I was going to ask a question about where were the education experts from DC. And I'm appreciative of Representative Henderson's comments as well. And just making sure that those individuals are experts, of course, and then also in the context of DC education, that helps a lot. So I'm happy we reached out to our partners at Howard and UDC, and then just doing a little deep dive of just what also the connections that they have within our school ecosystem. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I thought I heard feedback. Cool. Oh, okay, so that was for Elizabeth. Thanks. Alex, your turn. All right, so public spacing survey. I immediately went to, there's a strong chance, like any other public survey, that award date numbers in response are going to be low. And usually the response is, well, the member is going to help me push numbers up. And no. So how can we, or I guess, could you give me some idea about like how we do the public survey, and then whenever we do the engagement sessions, can there still be an opportunity for those individuals to engage in the survey so that we're not pushing out numbers? And of course, there's a good chance, I want to say it is, but just kind of looking at our past surveys that our numbers may be low and there's not enough representation. And then we're pushing out numbers in our public facing presentations that aren't fully representative of the ward. So I'm kind of curious about like, can we include the public survey into the engagement sessions? And then also with the town hall construct of like, I am happy to, can we link with like, maybe some of our PTOs that are like well-attended or something. It's just a little easier, as you know, to get to people than add another meeting to get to them. And I am happy to help with like, you know, some of our organizations that may have already some convenings that we can plug into. So that was that, but I also want to hear your response about that. And then what is this? Oh, for the ESSA amendment, I'm happy that U.S. Department of Education signed off on it. Were there any, I know it took a while from when we voted on it to their signature. Were there any changes that we should be aware of or anything that they made requested adjustments on that we should know about? And that's it.
And we're happy to provide some more information at a later point.
Great. So the other question then.
Yeah, Representative Reed, good to see you. Thank you for your questions. So as far as like I think leveraging PTOs, especially strong ones, I think that's a really excellent idea and one that as we think about the stakeholders that we're really trying to engage is an excellent audience to be targeting and to be using and to leveraging those opportunities. And so whether it means, you as Ward 8 representative being able to attend and sharing out that survey there, I think that's a great opportunity. I think as far as having the survey be a tool that can be used in the engagement sessions, I think that there's definitely an opportunity there. And I think that we can think through how could that survey be a little bit more of a larger window or time frame as opposed to how we start the work. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate your receptiveness, and I'm done.
Housekeeping note. We started 10 minutes late, so we're already 10 minutes behind, even though we're doing really good on time. So I just want to flag that for you all and for me to try to help me help us. Representative Lay, is that right?
Yeah,
Lady's spot, right?
sounds good. I'll go whatever. So a couple quick things. I just wanted to echo what Representative O'Leary said on the financial literacy. I think it's really important to see how it fits in. I mean, for me, it should be something that's required of our students, maybe not for a full course or a full even half a course, but something where they really leave high school with an understanding of how to be able to exist in the modern world with finances. I think that's something that you just can't leave high school without. So I'm excited to see how it fits in, but I know if we don't have it as a required course, something else has to go. So how would we look at that? And I'm interested to see where it fits now for a lot of the schools that are doing these courses. So I'm excited to work with you on that and Asi as well. On the issue of the school report cards, for me, I do support having a summative score. I'm glad we have that. I don't think it's got to be as base as, a star system, but I do think having some sort of score that parents can understand, measure, I think is helpful. And I would like to see it for all the schools, as long as it's presented in a way that doesn't, reflect poorly upon schools unnecessarily that are trying really hard. Some things I'd like to look at on there on the school enrollment side, looking at the issue of over enrollment. I mean, right now we have tremendous challenges at some schools in Ward 3 with over enrollment of schools, and that should be reflected in these ratings. It's a real difficult situation for our teachers and for our students, not having enough individual time with each other. Other issues on the school environment side of the report card that I would really like to see us focus on. One is leadership stability for both principals and teachers. That's something that's measured now, but it's important in schools like Eaton, where we're having a principal who hopefully is on the way out soon, but it's had a lot of issues this year. And it just really reflects a positive or negative school climate if you have teachers and leadership staying in those roles. I think other things that are important for me to see are we looking at making sure that we have all the services that are in DC law, mainly pre-K 3 and 4 for me. Like a lot of our schools in Ward 3, we're the only ward in the city that has no pre-K 3. That should be reflected in the school report cards because parents care about that a lot. The only other schools are Lafayette and Ross in our city that have no pre-K 3. So that's a huge concern. Also, the condition of the buildings, making sure that we have buildings that are safe, environmentally friendly. And then lastly would be safety in the schools. Looking at issues that when parents trying to look at whether they want to send their kid to a school, having a realistic assessment of the culture of safety, of incidents of bullying, violence in the school, that matters a lot to parents, even more so than whether or not the academics are there. So those types of things in terms of school environment, I would really love to work with you on and make sure that that's accurately reflected, because I think it gives parents a snapshot of whether they want to send their kid to that school or send them someplace else.
Definitely appreciate the feedback. I think on the individual pieces of things that may be reflected, I think will talk more about that in the September session, but glad to hear some of your thoughts. Now, one thing that I did want to point out, I believe you mentioned enrollment reflected in the ratings themselves, and just wanted to emphasize that the ratings part, how the score is calculated, that has been concluded. That was the work that we did with the state board last year. And so that will not be reopened, but how that could be reflected in a content piece, I think is one of the many things that we can talk about in September.
Like stability, because like, even if you have excessive enrollment or you have declining under enrollment, I mean, both of those are a signal to parents that there's a problem. So maybe we don't have to be as crass as looking at just enrollment numbers, but those are trends that parents really care about. You know, if they want to know their school's going to be there, if they've had a consistent decline of students, a consistent funding decline. And I think that's something you want to let parents know about. I mean, similar if the school's overcrowded with no relief in sight in the capital master facilities plan, I think that's something parents really do care about. So maybe there's a way we can reflect it without just tying it directly to enrollment, but I think those are factors that relate directly to school environment as well, not just enrollment. So I look forward to working with you.
Yes. Thanks. Question on processes for how we work together to choose what standards come up next. How was financial literacy selected? I'm excited about it, but how was it selected?
You want?
So I'll chime in here. For the process for selecting which standards come next, financial literacy and I think the DC report card, environmental literacy are outside of that. The internal working group between OSCE and the state board, which the staff is working together, they are mapping out, like going forward outside of financial literacy, how they will review standards in what order and the cadence and whatnot. So they are working on that to present that to both sets of leaderships on both sides, both at OSCE and at the state board. But literacy itself, I think, was brought up separately because it had already been brought up in legislation through the DC council. And we just wanted to make sure that.
Okay.
Yeah, and these.
So this one will.
Yeah, these will be the last sets of standards review that will happen. Before that, I can't remember if you said it or not, Director Butler, but our anticipated timeline for having that process complete is around January.
Okay. And am I understanding right that OSCE would draft this one, not a technical writing committee?
Yes, but we are building from in the financial literacy space. There are a number of strong national sets of standards, which of course we would want to adapt and modify for our context. But yes, OSCE will take the lead on drafting, and then be consulting with our experts, consulting with educators, consulting with students, consistent with Vice President O'Leary's great suggestion, and of course with the public and with this body.
And are the experts paid?
We will likely offer them a small stipend. We are not in a position to pay them in a significant amount that recognizes their expertise and their work. We find that many individuals at academic institutions are very happy and proud and pleased to be part of processes like this, but we generally do like to offer a small honorarium in order to recognize their contributions.
Also want to second what Representative Goulet asked, which I think is what gets taken off students' plates when we add additional things on top. As we've been having this discussion, I've been reminded of the many studies that, similar to reading literacy, financial literacy, it's not just teaching it, but how you teach it that actually leads to impact. And when you add it on top of a busy day and not with full engagement, it doesn't actually lead to outcomes that I think we all want to see. And to make sure that we're flagging the many times that financial literacy classes have been implemented that don't actually lead to any wealth-building changes over time, that concern me.
And if I just may respond to that, I am so glad that you are bringing that up. We did a fair bit of research at the outset of this process. There is actually a pretty solid body of research showing us what doesn't work in terms of financial literacy, and we are working with experts specifically to avoid that. And we're hearing a number of things. The first of which is make sure that the standards that you're developing reflect local context and need. And that's where the engagement piece comes in and becomes so critical. The next that we're hearing is build from what you have. So where there are strong existing social studies standards that include robust economic concepts, incorporate those. Where there are opportunities to cross-reference the existing math standards, make sure that you're doing that. And then the other piece that is interesting is research shows that a case study approach when developing curricular materials can be particularly powerful, including a case study approach that may provide some opportunities for practical opportunities for students to practically leverage their new skills and try them out in a relatively protected environment. So your point is very, very well taken and top of mind for us. We want this work to be much more than words on a page to actually change what happens for kids in the classroom.
Thank you. And one recommendation is to reach out to the capital area asset builders. It's a CBO
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to pick up where Representative Chang left off with a recommendation. So I have heard a lot about financial literacy and engagements in my communities, and people are really excited that this is something we're taking up. They feel like it's responsive to like what they want their children to learn. And having those conversations, people have raised like junior achievement as a really good local nonprofit practitioner. So maybe there's somebody from, I always interchange junior achievement and higher achievement, which are different, but junior achievement of Greater Washington seems to have good reviews from parents. I've heard that on more than one occasion. So thank you for that. I also, switching to the engagement around the report card, I appreciate seeing it built in where are the opportunities for us to work with OSSE to do engagement. I don't take that for granted, and I am increasingly excited about us being able to lay out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and like decide those things together. I do want to, I think with that in mind, one of the things I think can be confusing as we're having this conversation is like, what are the federal requirements for accountability? What are and what parameters have already been to a certain extent decided, given we've already taken a vote on like what we are hoping, what the board is hoping to see. And so like things, like I would assume Representative Williams' question is like the first question that we're going to get about, are we required to have a summative score? Or just like some of like being clear about what has already been decided and where we have wiggle room and where we don't. I think it's particularly important for people. And I think that's something we want to think about how to communicate in a clear way, because it's super wonky. I do wonder, Alex, you asked us to respond to the how you broke up the feedback and the content, with it being like content, summative, visuals. I appreciate having some chunking of things to help people focus. My wondering is about how that can be iterative at the same time. Like how we move from each piece of that. And if there are places that those topics, I guess, intersect, and what it looks like to say, okay, we heard you, and maybe we heard you on this, but did we hear you correctly as we move to the next piece of that? I don't know if I have a full recommendation, but I think it's something maybe we could be in conversation about, like what is the best way to chunk information and get feedback and have that iterative design that I think we're getting increasingly better at. So that would be my wondering.
President Thompson, that's a good question. I think And one of the reasons when we thought about the sequencing and like ending more so with the visual piece, because from the iterative side of things, like once we discuss those other two, you're building it in as you're getting to the kind of other things. And so I think there definitely is like a line or a process by which we don't want to see this as like we talk about content check, we talk about summative check, but I think we also see this as like the content and the enhancements and what could be new is potentially the most substantial when we talk about enhancements to their school report card, and from there building that into other things. But yes, iteration I think is important, and the intersectionality.
So I just want to be clear for the board. Particularly for the 3 types of engagements that you laid out here in the presentation. When do you need to know the state board is going to partner or participate with you all in that? Will there be joint planning sessions? Like I'm just thinking about the logistics and how and when we get members involved, or because one of them says September. And so I said, in my mind, September is like tomorrow. So that's all like the logistics of like how we want the board to participate. It's just like, do we need to turn in something by a certain date to you and those type of things?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely wanted to hear feedback here today from you all, but I think that you may have continue to think about it and process and give us additional feedback. I would say that the sooner the better. If you're able to give that feedback by the end of the month, that would really allow us to have the time to plan out the engagement then.
I think, I know, what we'll do is we'll just add this as an agenda item. At the leadership meeting, I will say, I wanted to wait until we had this presentation to see what kind of like came out of the session. Before we, said like, here are all the things, and so, it's helpful to hear, what people are thinking about, and then, be able to share some of those things and get clearer on the execution of it. But I do appreciate the funds. Right.
Can I do it back with you?
I was closing the queue since we are behind, like we are over.
No, you said we were doing well on time.
No, oh no, I said we are what I was saying is we are automatically 10 minutes behind because we started late, even though you all have been doing really well. So I was saying we are actually over time. I was trying to say it's not you all's fault in the longevity of the question. So I'm gonna say no to the back of the queue. But if there are things, I would say send an email now so that we can share them with Austin and get answers. We are over. All right. Thank you all. I am going to thank you, Opti, for the discussion and taking the time to engage board members and answer questions. The board looks forward to working with Opti on financial literacy standards and the DEC report. I'm actually going to now, so we're not taking a break now. We are actually moving to the ombudsman transition update. As we have shared, Serena Hayes, the former ombudsman for public education, submitted her resignation on June 15th. Her last day was June 30th. Due to the short notice, Vice President O'Leary and I held a transition call with Ms. Hayes to ensure the board had the necessary information to identify its next permanent ombudsman. In the interim, Assistant Ombudsman, we are recommending Assistant Ombudsman Tony Kleiner lead the office while the board conducts a rigorous and recruitment search process. Due to the statute governing the ombudsman's office, Tony Kleiner would need to be appointed via statutory resolution to complete Serena's current term, which ends on January 22nd, 2024. In your board materials for tonight, you should have a one-pager outlining next steps. I want to give people a moment to read that. If you have not read it already, before we open it up for questions. So please take a moment to look at that. Do people have questions about what I just shared? if people have questions about anything in the one page. Okay, perfect. I also want to thank the admin committee for the meetings it held during this time, because these things did not just materialize. And I want to thank staff for being able to get all the things in as we have a budget and HR processes in DC government. I want to take a moment actually to go to I guess a virtual piece of the meeting, because I want to invite Toni Brenner to introduce herself and say a few words.
Good evening, representatives. I am again Toni Kreiner, and I have been serving as one of the lead assistant ombudsmen with the office for at least a year and a half, working very closely with Serena around oversight hearings, the annual report, budgeting, and all of that good stuff. And so she recommended that I kind of just lead the work of the office again until the end of her term. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I look forward to collaborating with you all in the interim. And if any of you have any questions, I am here to answer them. And I look forward again to continue the work of the office. And so again, thank you for any consideration.
Thank you, Toni. I'm sorry you were not able to join us in person, but in case people have not met her. Toni, how long have you been in the ombudsman's office? I don't want to misquote.
A year and a half. Yep, a year and a half. Former DC public school school leader, oversaw the 9th grade academy over at Ballou State prior to joining the office. And so a very community oriented individual, very familiar with DC's education system. And again, a lot of the CBOs and MBOs throughout the district. And so I have been able to bring some of my partnerships into the office to continue the work with community engagement. And so again, looking forward to continuing to grow the office with some of the programs that I've already kind of implemented with this, which is the student-to-student mediation process to kind of address some of the violent crimes and school discipline and bullying issues that we've seen in our office. And so I'm looking forward again to doing the work as the interim, and hopefully, because I will apply, just FYI, to the official ombudsman role. I do look forward to continuing the work of the office in that capacity if selected to do so.
We will discuss the statutory resolution later in new business. Toni, I want to thank you for joining us. You are not required to hang around for the rest of the meeting. You are welcome to, because it is a public meeting. But I want to make sure that we're respectful of all our presenters' time, since we're running a bit behind. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next on our agenda tonight, we will have a debrief of our June public meeting panel. During our June public meeting, the board heard from national experts and teachers regarding what educators need to thrive in their profession. Kathleen Kaufman will lead a discussion to help us debrief last month's panel and identify next steps. Kathleen, I am turning you.
So I'm just gonna start with a brief kind of summary of what we've heard from the 3 panelists, as well as a couple of the public witnesses. It is related to your growth and development. So definitely one of the main things we've heard was the importance of continued transparent improvement in evaluation systems. So understanding when there are issues, addressing them and being open about the way forward in doing that. There were several suggestions about ways to refine impact specifically. So that would not apply to every LEA in the district, but DCPS as the largest one. that is a significant portion of our educators are governed by impact. And so there were suggestions about how to make it more aligned with the curriculum, how to make it sort of more respectful of teachers' work-life balance, and then also ways to kind of reduce the risk of corruption or misusing different elements of impact. There were suggestions of more frequent observations for teachers, so they have the opportunity to implement feedback before they're actually being formally evaluated in a way that impacts their pay and potentially their continued employment. And so giving teachers more frequent feedback about ways to improve, and also giving the evaluators more context for the classroom was one of the suggestions that came from several of the there was also feedback from some of the panelists about making the evaluation process more reciprocal, so allowing teachers to evaluators feedback and allowing teachers to explain, this is how I believe that I met the criteria for effectiveness or highly effectiveness, that maybe their observer who potentially had a different subject area expertise might not have noticed. And there was also the last thing on evaluation, notes about making sure that both teachers who are being observed and people who are evaluating teachers are really thoroughly trained on what the metrics actually are, so teachers know what they're supposed to do, and evaluators know what they're supposed to be looking for. And kind of making sure that, you know, if I teach a lesson and two different administrators come and observe that lesson, they should be giving me more or less the same score. So setting expectations for everyone, which makes the process more effective, so that people are getting consistent feedback, and also makes it just seem more fair to teachers if they know that their score that they're getting is not substantially worse or substantially better than if someone else observed it that day. There's also a couple of suggestions around professional development. So just making sure that before a new policy is implemented, that is going to affect the teacher's work. And we really saw that in, for example, about the previous social studies standards, making sure the teachers are thoroughly trained on what the new expectations are going to be, so that they know what they're supposed to be doing and aren't being necessarily held accountable for things that they don't even know about. We heard also about sort of facilitating community connections for new educators. And then sort of our last topic underneath teacher growth and development that we heard about was creating leadership roles for experienced educators. And there was a couple of different ways that that was proposed, through peer observation, through mentoring of new teachers by extra teachers, through instructional coaching. And then just making sure those opportunities are authentic, because if they're not, that can really harm sort of the relationships between different people within a system. If you're saying you're getting a leadership role, but then actually you're just being told through. So those were the kind of general themes that came out. If you look in your virtual or physical folder, whichever one you have, there's more information, and then there's links to different things about the different elements of impact that people mentioned, because there's a lot of acronyms that are being thrown around, and like different reports and research that are being referenced. So if you look at those, that has more details on it. So those are really the themes that we heard, and things that the board can continue to do research or advocate around, even if we don't necessarily have authority to make those changes as the board. So that was kind of the overview. Are there any questions?
I mean, I think it was a great presentation. You couldn't have got better people up there. I think for me, what would be really helpful is we've got a great committee, you know, ably led by, you know, our representatives Patterson and Williams on state standards, would be to try to look at a process that would allow for incremental changes to this. It seems like impact to me, at least, is stuck in an all or nothing battle where it's either we throw it out We keep it, we try to change it through legislation in some dramatic way, rather than people sitting around the table in good faith, hearing these concerns that are raised, and then making incremental changes, on an annual basis or every other year to try to, just fix things that are wrong. And there's no perfect system. I mean, there'll always be, issues with the evaluator that could come up. There'll be some standards that, help other people while disadvantage the others. But I think if people could just listen to each other better, sit down and not view this as like a all or nothing proposition, which is how I feel like it is now. And maybe what we could do on the state committee that we have is to come up with something to recommend a process like that, because I think impact has a lot of good points to it, certainly, but I think there's things that could be improved with it too. And I don't know, it just seems all or nothing to me. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so TCPS has made several changes throughout the years to impact. I don't know what their process is for coming up with those changes, but one of the links that are in the footnotes does show what the changes for that were implemented prior to SY 22-23. So you might be able to look at the past couple changes and see what have happened, kind of move towards these research-based evaluation methods.
Other thoughts?
I guess I'm just curious, what's the nature of this work on the board and like where we are as a city, like how we feel in like what timeline we should work at. I know that there is going to be more momentum for looking at teacher evaluations when this fall. So I'm just kind of curious what people's thoughts are for how the committee supports the board as a whole for moving to incremental changes with regards to school climate and teacher evaluation.
I'm happy to speak for myself when it comes to just my inability to keep everyone's work plan in my head. And so I don't know if there's a specific timeline that the committee has proposed that I think runs contrary to what Representative Poulet is describing, or would be complementary to, or like what. Because I know you, and I say that because I know you all have already given it some thought. And so I would want to build from like what you all have already given some thought to.
That makes sense. And I think that when we kind of debrief the committee committees later on, like in the timeline for the day.
I was just gonna say, I was gonna respond to Representative Goulet, but I don't think what he was saying, kind of an all or nothing, like getting away from impact doesn't mean nothing, like there would be something. So I don't think we have to jump straight to. I don't think we need to reframe it quite the way it is.
To be fair, I was hesitating because Kathleen is facilitating, but then I think so I was like, did I jump in because I want to help us move on?
No, that's fine. I just felt like that question that was asked was more like a question for the board, rather than a question for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm happy to continue to like call them. I don't know if I'm assuming Representative Reed's still on because I would have to like double check on some virtual. I don't know if Representative Reed had had a question or any thought.
No questions.
Okay, thank you. I think if there's nothing else immediate, I think one of the things that I would like a bit more understanding of for myself is while I completely understand impact is what DCPS uses, it is also not lost on me the amount of LEAs have. And I would imagine, not now I would imagine, but one of the things that I feel like we never completely became true for us as a jurisdiction was that we were going to share like best practices and share, and I don't mean that just for teacher evaluation or you know, curriculum or like I mean that I see that as a missed opportunity consistently. And it feels like for me, especially since I have so many, not just kids, but kids, schools, educators that are like moving back and forth across literally these school systems. I don't know, I couldn't tell you, or I don't think I have a full enough view of what the good, the bad, and ugly are. And I would hope that that is also something that like we could call attention to. Like, and not to say that everybody has to do the same things, but I would also just want to be knowledgeable and aware. Because that is an experience, those are experiences that the people I have responsibility to are having. And saying, I don't know, it can't possibly be good enough.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. And on this in particular, I would love to know what teachers, the various LEAs would say is working or not working. I mean, we've heard a lot about impact from teachers, but I couldn't say anything definitive about any other school, any other LEA's evaluation system. So I'd be curious. More.
We did initially have a panelist from a charter LEA the schedule, but unfortunately called in sick, so was not able to attend the public meeting. But I think it would be important for us before we start making recommendations to have an idea about what the landscape that we're working with is, that more than just,
That's not to take any heat off of you, yes, but you know.
And I would just say it may be a good thought for the committee itself, as you all are meeting, to potentially reach out to the DC Public Charter School Board and see if there's someone there who can join your committee meeting to share more, or maybe they've already done research on what the teacher evaluations are happening at the LEAs, so that the board doesn't have to recreate that. So maybe there's a document that they can share. Because I need for us to do work with somebody that already done it.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation. I'm curious if DME has anything, since they are charged with like cross-sector collaboration as well. Thank you for that. All right, last call. All right. At this time, thank you for first, thank you for your input and participation. We look forward to hearing how the state level and systemic policy committee builds on this work and how the full board can support it. At this time, you have been waiting. We are going to pause for a 5-minute break. We did not shave any time off for the break. So I don't know if we've caught up yet. I'm gonna check with Bernie. Try to see if there's a we can or should make adjustment. But we're going to take a 5-minute break now. It is 6:29. So I'm pretty sure it's going to hit 6:30 soon. We will reconvene at 6:35. Thank you.
You know what, I'm gonna take that off.
Is it okay?
We're still in
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it beautiful?
It had nothing to do with this. It's beautification.
Pizza good. Pizza. I need to serve.
No, we don't.
where the date's done, you have to put a draft in front of us. The committee met one final time, since the last time we all as a board were together, to incorporate changes. And they met on July 30th, so that means they worked right up into their sunset. And today, we will discuss a few areas that came up as far as additional clarification and in need of feedback. At this time, I am going to turn to, I guess you are technically former committee chair,
Sure.
Representative Boulay, to facilitate a discussion on the key areas that warrant further discussion.
So just want to thank everybody. Our goal with these bylaws was to kind of transform what we had, because what we had was basically something you'd have for bylaws for a nonprofit. And try to split the difference between what something like DC Council has, which is an established legislative body. Like, we're a body of elected officials. So we probably wanted something more than the bylaws we had, which were basically something you'd start out with a basic of beginning nonprofit and a cut and paste. We put a lot of things in to try to create a process for putting items on the agenda. We looked at expulsion, reprimand, censure, things that are in the council's rules, and borrowed language from those rules because those have been vetted many times and they're very local here in DC. But there were some issues that we just couldn't reach agreement on. They're going to be Fraser's problem now, so we're going to give them to you, Representative O'Leary. And I'm going to go through the issues on this list where we just weren't able to get to consensus, because this goes to the admin committee next and then comes to the full body. So these are issues, and I've identified the member here.
Everyone has a handout
Oh, you have this, yes, in your
in
folder.
your folder that lists that he's gonna go through.
Yeah, and I just want to thank Representative Reed, who's on with us on the virtually, and then Representative Bernstead for their amazing assistance on this throughout. The first issue Representative Reed raised is, do we want to consider also including our oversight and letting students participate who are either homeschooled or in private schools in DC, and how we would include those. That's not a change that we made in the bylaws markup, but it's something that we may want to look at going forward. Representative Chang, and for each of these, I've identified the section of the bylaws where the issue would be addressed by Representative O'Leary's committee. Representative Chang raised the issue of whether we want to have a more clear process in place on how we replace absent student representatives if they're not showing up, if they're not able to do the work anymore. Do we need that spelled out in the bylaws, or is that a standard operating procedure thing that is worked out and we can decide that in the future? Also on the issue of student representatives, Representative Reed raised whether it should be the executive director creating the process for student applications, or whether that should be some other group, perhaps the admin committee, perhaps the president, and then how we do that going forward. This is the most controversial issue by far. There's several of our representatives raised an issue with this. Representatives Reed, Henderson, Williams, and Bernstead all just at least had some discomfort with this. Some, I think, outright opposed the idea of switching it. But whether we move from a one-year term to a two-year term to appoint the president and the vice president, I felt pretty strongly we should have two-year terms. It just seemed 1 year is not enough to really give any stability in there. That's what the council process is, as well as doing it in two-year cycles, because DC's elections are staggered in two-year blocks. Right now, the way it's written is it does shift these elections to two-year terms, but it could always be at the full board switched back, or within the admin committee switched back to a one-year cycle. So right now, the current print is with the 2 years in place. And that's spelled out here.
Was there a vote on that in the committee?
It was voted in block. So rules were presented as a committee print draft, and it was voted in block, but both Representatives Reed and Bernstead said it was something they wanted to follow up on in the future. And I think Representative Reed had outright concern about the issue and put on the record she was concerned about it. Representative Bernstead, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you wanted the issue discussed both in the admin committee and then by the full board for future discussion.
I raised it. There wasn't consensus on that issue from my understanding. I didn't raise that I would dissented. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, great. And we all were of the impression that this was an issue the full board would have to take up because there was not consensus in the committee or at the full board on the issue. So I just wanted to fairly represent that before the board is something that we were still Not fully united on. Representative White.
My only ask, is that we save the questions to the end, especially given I'm still trying to help us make up time, and that's typically how we operate. So
I'll go fast.
Thank you.
All right, next one. Representative Henderson raised the issue of whether we need greater clarity to appoint members to the governmental, budget, local and state. I borrowed a lot of this language from the old bylaws. Currently, it's the president who's appointing it, and it seems they flow through the admin committee in some way based on the old admin committee's structure. But if that has changed, we may want to sync up that language, because I think as Representative Henderson pointed out, there is some duplication of language there, and it's not clear that if President Thompson's appointing and it goes to Vice President O'Leary, what then his role with the admin committee is. Is it to approve? Is it to vet? What specifically is that? And we may want greater clarity on that. For regular meetings, this was Representative Henderson raised this question of whether or not we should shift our expert panels from the public meetings to the roundtables. I know Representative Chang just asked, I think, generally about what the purpose of these roundtables were. They were in our original bylaws. I don't think we've ever fully utilized them. I think it's basically a way to have a formal process with the board, but without having to go through all the bells and whistles of that and having people sit across the table from each other. So a roundtable, for example, probably could be held in this room here, where you're just talking through an issue or something. So I think that's something to discuss, with the full board, if whether we want to use roundtables more often in place of the more formal public meetings. The next issue that was raised also by Representative Henderson was, are there any circumstances where we want to say that there's an official SBOE vote needed at a working session? I think right now the bylaws prohibit that, but I think you envisioned, Representative Henderson, maybe some situations where we may want to take a vote, at least a procedural vote on something. So whether we should consider that. On the next one, consideration of measures, Representative Reed raised the idea of, we didn't do it in committee, but we talked about it a lot. And I definitely supported her idea for this. Representative Reed talked about, that we have already, in our equity framework of the board, equity built into everything we do, and that equity in practice is more than an equity statement. So she suggested perhaps getting rid of an equity statement because, the board members in voting for something evaluate whether or not it has adequate equity to be supported, and that this could be reducing a paperwork burden on staff. So whether we consider getting rid of equity statements as a requirement for each resolution or each state resolution. Then notice of meetings, Representative Chang raised this, talking about, and I think this relates to the open meetings requirements, Representative Chang. Just I cited the best language here that I was able to pull from the council rules on this, but there could be some additional clarity added to that, just in case members get together. What constitutes an informal gathering versus what triggers open meetings? Then we may want to discuss that, with our Office of Open Meetings here in DC. And then ethical standards, President Thompson raised the issue of whether we want to add language to ensure SBOE staff are free from bullying and harassment. Just making sure it was something we talked about in the committee level, but we just weren't able to get consensus on the language. So I've got a draft of language. It'll go to Representative O'Leary next on that issue. And I know you raised that at the last working session we've had on this issue as well. The idea of a personal benefit, Representative Reed raised the question of whether the language that the DC Council has right now adequately clarifies what personal benefit means. She was concerned that when it says the members of the state board can't do anything for their personal benefit, that in an intangible way, anything we do could be perceived as for our personal benefit, even if it's engaging with constituents, having a community meeting. So just making it clear that that really applies to financial benefit or some sort of personal enrichment rather than just kind of a theoretical benefit, but she felt greater clarity may be helpful in that area. Additionally, Representatives Reed and Bernstead raised the issue of whether the council's language on censure and expulsion was appropriate. Right now, there's specific language in the DC Council rules that prohibit the censure or expulsion of any member for free speech issues, no matter how offensive the speech may be. I don't want to single out any one individual, but I'll cite the example. I mean, there was an issue where somebody referenced Jewish people controlling weather, and I mean, that offended a great many people. There was calls for censure at that time, but at the time, there was clear from the council rules, something like that, even though it's offensive to many people, isn't something that's going to rise to the level of censure. So that the council rules say this, but I think there was question of if there is offensive speech or hate speech, does that rise to the level of censure or expulsion? So it's something to think about for the full board. The issue of reprimand, censure, and expulsion, also Representative Chang raised the concern that, if 7 members of the board vote to expel a member, should there be a finding by Bega first, that there was some sort of, for cause removal or some sort of adverse finding by Bega or an outside counsel. So it's just not majority rules on something like that. And, we weren't able, we stuck with what the council standard was, but I think it's a good point and definitely worth thinking about here. And then I put the last thing on the agenda here, because I'm not sure that we got the right balance. I think we tried to. A lot of members at both the retreat and then the working session raised the issue of how do we create a by right agenda that ensures things get on the agenda if a process is followed, and rather than just having a nomination process for resolutions. But then I think Representative Chang, you raised the issue of we also don't want to make this process so inflexible that we can't get things done. And that we restrict ourselves. So we try to strike that balance here with some additional requirements for transparency and making sure documents are out there to members and the public, but then also having a 2/3 vote to be able to waive those requirements, in cases where there's a need to move quicker on certain things. And you can see what we came up with here. I tried to summarize in these bullets so everyone could see it. And I'm not wedded to these at all, but it was our best effort to try to kind of put in place a structure to get items on the agenda and kind of get away from just a basically having someone seconding something to put it on the agenda, which is more of a standard for a nonprofit board than an elected body. So trying to, move us into the next century with these bylaws. And I'm open for any questions on it. I really just want to thank my committee members for their hard work on it. And I think we gave you something good, Representative O'Leary, but there's certainly a lot of questions still out there.
Representative Boulet,
Yes.
the people who have, what is it, electronic materials, this is not online yet, so, I don't know who opted for electronic materials and would need a hard copy.
I think you have it in your folders. They gave you.
No.
No, I have extras here. I made break.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm just actually. Is it just, okay,
I have for everyone. Who did not get a copy of this?
and then, Representative Boulet, I have here that you are facilitating the discussion.
Representative Boulay.
Yeah.
Okay, I know more than one person.
Charles Leslie is in the meeting, it's not boxed now, it's not earlier. Got it. Started recording. Thank you. I think it was Rob and Jeff.
Thank you, Javon. Okay. Now, Representative Boulet, I have it here that you are facilitating discussions. I'm going to do that to you. Executive Director Butler, how much time do we have?
For this, we had 15 minutes.
All right.
All right. So any questions on this? I think the process will go to you next, Representative O'Leary. So you'll then vote it out of your committee and then it would go to the full board. This is the process, I believe, that we do for bylaws.
So at this point, we'll wait for that committee to weigh in on all these questions that are filed.
I mean, we can discuss them now. I mean,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
there's,
All right, okay, so maybe I should be clear, maybe I should insert a little bit more. We are currently discussing anything that needs to be discussed, either that is on this page or is in the bylaws that are on, or maybe additional thoughts that were jogged as Representative Boulay shared the overview. But just like if we did a committee report, just like I see does this reports and we ask questions or have discussion, this is the time for discussion. So we have 15 minutes for discussion now. I'm happy to start if we don't have discussion items, but Representative Boulay is facilitating the discussion, which is open to all members. So I'm just gonna start. One of the things that I think we will have to talk about is this committee, which has now sunset. And I know you all said that you did not want more time. Part of the charge was also standard operating procedures, and that is not in here. And so we are going to have to think about what it looks like to complete the standing operating procedures charter. So I think some of the things that were raised in here are important things, but also might fall into the standard operating procedures bucket. Like I know, I'll use the thing that I raised around like the staff, or just, and it's not just that, but the staff and members, like some of those things, those are not, in my opinion, bylaws things, they're SOP things. Or putting things on the agenda, I think would be SOP things. Like some of the things, some of that might fall in the SOP things, some of that might fall in the bylaws, but I think some of it, as far as clarity of process, that's why you have standard operating procedures. There are probably some other things that I would recommend become standing operating procedures. And I am wondering if there is some type of, if that work might also benefit from some combination of members and staff working together on that. And I don't want to take up too much time. I'm happy to share why if you have questions about that, but I think some hybrid version of members and staff taking on that work might be the next best thing. And then I will share my just hope for the discussion. If there are people who have especially very strong feelings about things, if they not just say, I like this or I don't like this, but be able to think, say why, that would be really helpful. I would say to me as a member who will have to vote on things and have to want to consider other people's opinions, because I don't think we've had enough conversation where people say, I feel strongly about this because here's what I'm hoping for. I think we're now getting to a place because we have something in front of us, but we can start to do that instead of like some of just the reaction. So I was something.
So my response is thank you. I think if you would like us to continue doing standard operating procedure work, I'm glad to work with our staff on that. So just, that's up to you, President Thompson, whatever you'd like us to do. I know there's issues like, for example, like we cite a sexual harassment policy that we've not developed yet, things like that. I think clearly fall within standard operating procedures. I think a number of these things we've added here, at your discretion, you could move over to become standard operating procedures, so they wouldn't necessarily need to be in the bylaws or not. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there, and I'm just happy to work and help, in any way you need me to assist Representative O'Leary on this project. I'm glad to do so.
Representative May.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm sleeping.
No, Representative Henderson.
Representative Henderson. Okay, I keep, I'm spoiled here. You're always being Representative Henderson.
So I'll just say on the 2-year term for leadership, like I think I understand the argument for and the sort of consistency, but I feel like there's not an equivalence to the state board and the council, because like we're not, like, this isn't our full-time job. Like I feel like there's more personal volatility, just intrinsic in this role, in terms of like life things, job things like that. And I also just feel like it's difficult for we're electing every 2 years, then like there's an incoming group of representatives who are being asked to vote for 2 years of leadership. Like first, like right off, it's your first vote, and you might not have a lot of context, and so I feel like it's a lot. It's a long commitment to be voting on, maybe without a lot of information.
Sharon, Representative Williams,
I want to add to that too, and I share the rationale behind that. That given the way the city has kind of set up the cycles, wards 7, 8, and the at-large representative are all in the same cycle. So, we all know that many residents east of the river and Warrington. But just in terms of making sure there's like, you know, equity of voice for leadership and representation, you know, if I'm not saying that, you know, anything will happen with particular representative's decisions, but that presents an opportunity for like for incoming members in Ward 7, 8 and at large to come into the board and not have a reasonable opportunity to assume leadership, or for citizens or for residents to have leadership east of the river every single leadership opportunity, if that makes sense. So for instance, I'll be more direct. So let's say that we have new leadership next in the next election, and there's new representatives from Ward 7, 8 and at large. On top of what Representative Henderson said, where like you're coming in, I don't feel like it's that reasonable to expect an incoming member to come in and instantly run for a leadership position, having not been on the board for some time. So that could mean that there's that, a lot of our city is not having a fair chance at having leadership on the state board of education.
And it also means that there's not cross-board collaborations. People elected in the cycles will stay leadership of people elected in those cycles, because you're unlikely to run your first, like, you're not gonna be sworn in and then that first January meeting run for like a position.
The only question, if I could raise a question just back to that, is it kind of goes both ways though, because there's no telling which side's going to have more stability. So like you could just as easily be the other selection of 4 members that don't have the experience in there, and then the representatives on the other cycle do. So why would it be the representatives from Ward 7 and 8 that would be disadvantaged from this when the cycle is the cycle? It's a 2-year cycle.
It's not that specifically members from Ward 7 and 8 would be disadvantaged, it's that members from across cycles would not likely serve together. If it's your first time being appointed to the board, you're likely not going to run for president or vice president in your first month. And if you don't do that, the next cycle, members from the other wards will be newly elected and they won't do like cross applications. So it's more about having like diversification or making sure that there can be like cross cycle and cross board collaboration.
Continuity. I see your point.
Yeah.
There's some more continuity because you have at least one person from one cycle and another person from another
Yeah.
cycle. And
You
you're
can
trying to
run- you can
provide that
simply run
cross
your second
collaboration.
year.
So I see your
Yeah,
point.
but you're likely not to run the January that
Right.
you got like sworn in. And if that's the case, the next 2 cycles, the next 2 years, people from the other cycle will be new. And then they're likely not to run, so you're not gonna have like cross cycle leadership, which could present an issue in my opinion, because that means that like you'd never see it, like, for example, Ward 1 and Ward 8, Ward 2 and Ward 3, whatever it is, and just cross cycle.
But I will say to this representative that would probably be the case in the first election. But as we got more into it, like the second time around for a 2-year term, you could see it because then you have people who have been there for a little while, also people who have come on and sat for 2 years, where they could kind of collaborate and say, okay, there's a person from this cycle that's maybe up for election in the next couple of years, but there's a new person that's been on for a little time. So I do see as it goes along, the first cycle, definitely, I see what you're saying, but
You only have 2 cycles in your term, let's say you only serve 1 term. January, you get sworn in, then you vote on a president. 2 Januaries or 2 years later, then you vote, and the people that you were on the board when you got sworn in are leaving, so then new people are coming in. I mean, like,
unless they run again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then like people are leaving, so I just in the last election, we had a bunch of changes in the board, but folks weren't gonna run their first one. It makes sense, in my opinion, that like we would want to have, we would want people to have the capacity to serve people in other cycles.
Representative Shane?
And my question would be, what is the problem we're trying to solve for by having the change? What gain, what is the benefit? And is it worth the cost of the amount of time it takes us at the beginning of the year to actually go through the whole process and basically have a whole month of very little else that we do more often than not? And I think of this role as you're doing a lot of administrative work, and we're still more or less shaping the agenda, but I mean, you're doing a lot of the back office work, and with experience you get better at that, and I'm not sure I see what the board gains with with a more frequent change relative to the cost.
Well, I'll try to mention, was that me? Like, what is, so I will say, and I think I said this to Vice President earlier. If I had not served in leadership at any point, I probably would say, I don't understand what it gains. To do it the longer, like to do a 2-year term. And I will also transparently say the 2-year term did not come from either of us. We found out about that when you were, we're not on the committee. We found out about that when you all did. But what I would tell you, my experience was in 2 different capacities. So first, like when I became vice president in my 2nd year, it took us, quite frankly, months just to get things like turned over to us. Those things took months. It also took months for us to like reset all the meetings with the other agencies. Like for a quarter, like it's not just a month of transition, it really is at least, even if everything is done well, a quarter where like your work is just like, you're doing the work to try to start to do work again, and that really is difficult. Just given, like to your point, like the part-time nature of the board, but also just like some of the dynamics, I would say, around the state board and the sister agencies in our own position of power. And just like making people like do certain things or remember, like we're not always like the first thought on, I don't want to call it any particular stakeholder out, but we're not always like the first thought on people's mind. And so like that really was like a delay. Those things were a delay in the work. And I remember when I was elected president, and we started going to agency meetings again, there were actually agencies who said, oh, well, it's good to have some continuity because we've had 3 different sets of leadership in 3 years. And that makes it really difficult for like some of the work that goes like across the board. And I didn't really, I heard it, but I don't think I really understood it or I really like appreciated or valued that thing. I was like, what does that mean? But like, I can't understand, like when Representative Goulet said, there's an argument for like continuity and work of the board outside of the, I would say, exceptional things. And I don't mean exceptional in like a particularly positive way. I really mean they are the exception, like having to hire a new executive director or like now about to do that. But like outside of those things, just the getting up to speed and doing the work. I get why that was like, if we would have had the same president and vice president, there probably would have been delays. There probably would have been less delays in just like the continuity of the work. And I don't think that's something I would have appreciated at all. And so that's just transparently my experience. Now,
with limited time, I'm curious what the idea is for the, I mean, we're not gonna make our way through hashing out and talking through.
Well, I think this was just to put the ideas out there that weren't resolved, because we didn't want to, people gave good comments.
Yeah.
Some of the things we agreed with, some we didn't agree with. We wanted to put what was still out there.
Okay.
So this was to continue discussion.
Would you like us to send you information about how, like, I like the idea of shifting expert panels to round tables and for public meetings. But, where do I share that?
I think it would go now to Frazier, but I mean, I'm glad to help him in any way he wants. If you want to extend our work, President Thompson, I mean, whatever you would like to do. Oh, I'm sorry. On the video screen, is that Representative Reed? Oh, Bernice, sorry. And I think we had Representative O'Leary.
It's not looking, so they.
I know, they are looking. I would say a couple of things, because now that the committee has officially ended, it does go to the admin committee. And I think at the next admin committee, which is scheduled on Monday, they decide how to proceed with these comments. And if folks have particular views or votes in favor, so like we want to do a survey to like we will figure out sort of how to have that full board engagement at the admin meeting and decide what happens next. But the goal is still to have another full discussion or capture the board's feedback, particularly around these areas. And I'd like to say of the whole document, like these were the areas that people didn't, there wasn't absolute consensus on. So there, I mean, the document is pretty much done. I mean, because I think it's like 40 something pages. These are small pieces, but also I think very important pieces to look at. And my only comment about the election of president and vice president, I also think once the board establishes a set of standard operating procedures, transitions are easier. I feel like that is a big reason why transitions were so rocky between leadership, because there are not things in place that facilitate that transition between leadership. So I think having that, building that out can help facilitate easier transition.
I appreciate you saying that, and I think, I mean, our President Thompson said it too, like underscoring the importance of standard operating procedures. So I guess that begs the question, like, what is our plan for establishing those, given that there's focus on the bylaws, and we still need some of those more nitty-gritty procedural elements to be able to prove how it's function.
Okay, so this is what I was learning. So I want to share my understanding of two things. So understanding of thing one, this ad hoc committee, the task, like the scope of work was actually both of those things. But the committee has sunset, so the committee has disbanded. Like and I think I asked a couple times, do we as a board want to extend this particular committee? And no one said yes. So what we have to do as the admin committee, and I do want to, I think everything Executive Director Butler said around like coming up with a plan for how to get work now that committee has done that. Is something the admin, is a discussion the admin committee has to like engage the board in. What I would anticipate, not having had the opportunity, even though I'm an admin committee member, talk about this with the rest of the admin committee is, it is not what is it, concrete, that we have to necessarily even vote on this at the July meeting. I would assume that if we would have had, like if we would have had enough areas of consensus and there were not substantial changes the admin committee needed to be responsible for facilitating, then I would say yes, we will vote in July. But I think it was worth seeing like how this discussion is going to figure that out. So we will have to put forward, now that this is like referred to us, now that the committee has referred this to us, it is now Vice President O'Leary as the head of the admin committee job to report out to say, here is what we are proposing to do. I started with one of my discussion points being, I think, especially for the standard operating procedures, it actually might benefit from it not having been done by the committee because not transparently, but like the thing I'm wondering about is if there is some equal footing that can be helpful because staff have so much visibility into what it takes to get the work done. And then we also have some staff who have worked across several boards to be able to share things. And so maybe it's like some combination of members, like, and I'm not gonna assign anybody, but like one staff member or two staff members who have been here for a little bit longer, one staff member that's newer, one board member that's been here for a little bit longer, one board member that's newer, so that we can both get perspectives, like from what it is to be a board member and what it is to be a staff member, but we have to like discuss all of those things. We will need a vehicle though to move this forward because the admin committee, just as we just talked about transition, will have a lot going on in the next couple of months because it is time for us to start budget again. We have to deal with budget transition and all the things, and I do not want the work to get bogged down or delayed because of other things that are on the admin committee's plate. So that is a very long-winded way, but hopefully helpful in just like sharing some of my thoughts. Is a possible path forward, but no path forward has been decided because we did not know how this was gonna happen today, like where this is gonna come out of today. Can't quite decide that.
But we did anticipate that.
We anticipated. that.
And this has been very fruitful. And if I'm the person that's got to pick the working group to get the bylaws and the standard operating procedures done, then we need the board's help on this, because we can get this done very quickly if we focus on the success of it. It's very important that we have a standard operating procedure for the board. Very important, and we don't have it. All of your ideas about the bylaws are very helpful. Like, and you know, it's a long document with a lot of stuff on it. I don't know if it needs to be that long, but it might. All right, but we need to make sure, but we don't have a time frame necessarily. It doesn't have to be done. And as President Thompson said, we don't want to vote on it in July because we don't have the answers for it. So I'm requesting, and I'll be requesting some of you to be part of a working group to work on these things. Is that clear with everybody? And I just want to add the thing, I didn't have a horse in the race about a 1 year or 2 year or anything like that. I came to the State Board of Education with less knowledge about the machinations of the State Board of Education than anyone in this room, by far. And I just came into a leadership position after thinking about it for a couple of years because, but this year. And what I found in the leadership position, the 6 months that I've been on, is there is so much to do. Like when Ebony Rose was talking about, I mean, the ombudsman thing sort of jumped out at us, and we have to work on it. We spent, 2 leadership meetings because we meet every week for an hour and a half, just working on who the, and I know y'all work on other things, but I'm just talking about part of being the leadership, and our meetings with all of the education partners have been very fruitful in this 6 months. I think that I sort of lean towards the 2-year thing. I don't, when I thought about it, because I've been under presidents from almost all wards, and vice presidents from almost all wards, and because I now have been at 5 years on the board, and so it sort of filters out like that. There's no east or west of the river that's dominating on the leadership at all. But I think that you really need to. You can't teach experience. That was what my teacher retention spiel was about, how we don't treat our younger teachers right. Because you can't, you don't come in knowing what to do when you're a teacher. And especially in leadership, you just, you learn every day. So I think it's an idea that might bear fruit to have a 2-year term. And I'm not saying that because it would give me a job for another year, because I'm not looking for that.
I was shocked and appalled the first time I heard. I was like, what? Okay, are there any other, we are probably, it feels close to 15 minutes or over. That's what it's giving in my spirit. But I want to make sure I didn't immediately cut anyone off. Okay, so I do want to very much thank the bylaws committee for taking on this task. because while I'm sure it was not a sexy one, it is a very substantive document that they produced. I can't imagine that without you all's effort, we would have made it thus far. So thank you for this, and thank you for all of the members who have shared feedback. And we will do our best to outline a way forward to continue the work moving forward. As we share, the bylaws will be advanced to the admin committee for final review regarding the next steps. Brian, well, none of this actually. There probably going to be some substantive conversations we need to have. So I think we will be able to share out both next steps on getting to final on the bylaws and how we decide the best way to accomplish the standing and operating procedure work that remains to be done. So now that we have had that, I would say big joker committee report, the baby committee reports in comparison, because they will not be 15 minutes, but they will be equally as substantive. Our each committee chair or co-chair have 3 minutes is what we have. Chair followed by 2 minutes for questions. And we have talked a lot about admin. Admin is also first.
Okay, you all have the notes from the admin committee in front of you. You can, this is how I run my class too. You can all read. So I'm just going to the, it talks about Serena's resignation, but we appointed Tony Criner, her salary. And on Monday, we're going to be talking what, or the OSSI and OMB are going to be talking about their contractor with DGS. We will be talking with the chairman tomorrow in our meeting with the chairman about our space downstairs and the lack of any help with that. And Executive Director Butler is going to let us all know about the documents about and you all understood, I think, about she has been appointed as an interim or an acting ombudsman up until February. That's when the term runs out. So we couldn't do anything but do that, right? So she has to fill that that space until February, when there will be a search. That's it. Yes, sir.
This salary increase, that's increased compared to her salary as assistant ombudsman, or is there a change in the ombudsman salary?
It's what is it?
Oh, I'm happy to chime in. So a couple of things that we learned during this process. So first, of course, every DC government position has a band. So we first checked to see make sure we knew what the band was for the ombudsman. So we wanted to make sure that the interim had a salary within the band. We also checked with DCHR to figure out what and got advice from them as far as like what their guidance was as far as what would be approved as far as like getting her into the band. They told us that typically they would approve up to, they pretty much approve 10 to 15% of an increase when additional duties are taken on. And that within the 10 to 15% range, because between 10 and 15%, we have to provide a justification. We also, we reviewed Tony's resume against the position and made a recommendation of 13% increase to make sure she was in the band, but also in line with what could be approved by DCHR. It is a change from the current ombudsman's, well, the former ombudsman's salary. So it is less than what the former ombudsman was making, but the former ombudsman also had much more experience and different credentials than Tony does.
That's a great question, Robert. And so when the job is open in February or before February, or when the job is, that's going to be a different salary.
Well, yeah, we would do, the person will negotiate their salary with that. Other thing that I learned, because we've said it a couple times, but I want to make sure it is clear for everyone. The ombudsman and the student advocate positions, the way we appoint them is written into statute. And so one of the things we learned during this process is we initially were under the impression that we could appoint an interim to start the search, similar to what we did when we did the ED process. But since it is a termed position for 5 years, the statute, and we actually had to go and ask the OHE to get their opinion, says that you have to first replace someone within 75 days. And whoever you appoint as the interim serves the remainder of the term. So we had a decision to make as an admin committee. Will we leave the position vacant in hopes that we could somehow magically conduct a search in 75 days? And I want to be very clear, it is 75 calendar days, not business days, not nobody cares for this summer.
In the middle of summer.
Literally, we would be in violation of the statute if we were not able to place the ombudsman in 75 days to fulfill the remainder of the term. Hence our decision to appoint Tony as the interim, and why we're saying she would serve through the remainder of Serena's term, which will allow us time to do a search as a board, which could have many of the, we haven't completely gotten to what the process will look like, but previous searches have included members of the board, they've included community members, they've included partners. We can't do that well in 75 days. We can't do it at all in 75 days. So that is just a little bit of background on why we made the decisions we made and things we learned about the SBOE and and how things are written in. I would argue we might want to change those statutes because that's tough. But so that is true for the ombudsman and the student advocate. And I'm sharing all of this with you all because we also will have to reappoint the student advocate in short order.
And so that the board will be involved in the hiring process for the ombudsman in February, just as we were with the executive director.
Other questions? All right, thank you, admin committee members, school community and well-being.
Yeah, thank you. So we did not meet last month. However, Dr. Fleischer has made draft updates to the website that the team will be providing some feedback and updates on. And so that's where we are.
Thank you. State level and systemic policy committee.
So we met on Friday, June 23rd. And there were a couple of things we talked about. So I quickly recap and then also pose a couple questions to the board at large about how the committee moves forward. So we did, one of the main things that as we situate ourselves and try to figure out what we take on was looking at different things. So I'll go kind of one at a time. We talked about literacy and kind of situating the board supporting the work of the task force as the task force recommendations get crystallized, and how we can kind of think strategically about the timing of engaging the broader community and supporting the task force recommendations when they're in draft form before they kind of get finalized. We also kind of waited on figuring out what next steps make most sense with regards to the report card and the financial literacy standards, given that Aussie was presenting today. And so I kind of want to pause there for a second to kind of see given what we heard today, are there any suggestions or recommendations that the committee take on those two items between now and when OSSI comes back to us in September? Because as a committee and as a board, we're grappling with like, how do we move that work forward on financial literacy and the report card in conjunction with what OSSI is already doing?
Can I make
Go ahead, please.
I would say a recommendation. So now that we have heard Oscar's presentation and have some of the materials in addition to the bones of a timeline, it might be good to overlay some of those things that the committee work plan in like the months, since because I don't think it's by accident, given Alex used to work with us, that is at a month's level. I would say that actually fits very well into what I have experienced working with, especially Dr. Fleischer, and being able to get super concrete on when things happen. It might be good for you all next steps, and also could be informative for us as we are having conversations with OSSI about who does what when. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. And
My thoughts really center around acknowledging particularly that the board usually doesn't have committee, like, we don't do activities or engagements or committee meetings in August. So like, just thinking about that in your time frame, so that as you are planning what your next steps are, to just think about when you meet in July, with almost like September as that starting point. And if there are ways that that you like or don't like what OSSI has presented, and if that's something that you want to talk about in July, to get that to us so that we can get it to OSSI, because OSSI has also shared they will not be engaging with us in August, even for our monthly leadership meeting, because they don't meet with external people until while they're preparing for their school year in August. So
thanks. I think that, yeah, those ideas that come up, and that's an important reminder because, you know, the back to school kind of has so many things that it brings. So as we meet again before that time, thinking of how we want to engage community around those two issues. Any other thoughts on either of those two topics?
Just one thing about our meetings with Superintendent Grant. I wasn't in leadership when Hansel Kang was the superintendent, but I think that she listens to us. I mean, I felt that there was a sea change from where we were with the social study standards last year at this time, let's say, and where we are now. So I think that there's nothing we can push, and they don't, it doesn't seem to me that it seems to me that they listen and respond positively to what we have to say. Because especially with the report card, you know, the financial literacy thing is kind of a policy kind of thing, but the report card is a meat and potatoes kind of a change that's got to be made. And so, you know, it's not gonna just be a Band-Aid. That's not what we want. And so I think that we want to continue to push to get
major item on top of just like state board business with regards to the committee page on the website was looking at upcoming topics for panels. And so two topics that we wanted to flag were kind of situating the topic in conjunction with other work that's going on around the city. So thinking about a literacy task force panel in October that kind of is positioned between the draft recommendations and the final recommendations of the task force, And then also looking at a panel potentially on.
Is that not a person? That's an actual.
That's the thing. And then the second one was down here. Yeah.
But then it's not singing on. I don't know why.
I think we gotta keep going and then try to make the sound work with this one. That would be helpful if there is no owl. We have 4 seats. 5, actually, there's one right here. That's a 2% me a break and our personal space. Go guarded. Malaya says it's back, but it's choppy. Oh, she said it's good to go now. Perfect.
Oh, so you need to move because they can hear you, but not over here. Okay.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, we get there. We are almost there. Yeah. You're back, huh? Anyway. I'm the way to everybody is, since giving All right, all right. All right, okay, so we have relocated, and we are doing our best, with the audio we have. So thank you, members, and anyone of the viewing public for being, flexible, with us. Well,
I think we just concluded the state.
that's what I was gonna ask you, where did you feel concluded? All right, student advisory committee.
I was not at the June meeting and I don't have notes for it, so I don't have a committee report.
Okay. Once we get a report, we'll make sure it's on that. All right, so almost to the finish line. New business and other discussion. I want to turn us to our new business, asking members if there are any additional items to the current list. Here's the list. 2023 fall engagement discussion. Discussion to remove restraint and seclusion in schools. The statutory resolution around the OSSI busing. The statutory resolution about the appointment of interim ombudsman. The ceremonial resolution recognizing the contributions of our former ombudsman, and a ceremonial resolution recognizing our graduating student representative. Are there any additions to that list? All right, I'm at peace with hearing none. So if there are no new business items, we are going to proceed with the list that we have. First step, 2023 fall engagement, Director Butler.
So you all have a one pager in your folders that does sentences like a who, what, when, where, why, basic elementary questions to help us get through. So each year, and I say each year, well, at the very least last year, there was a set of fall engagement that the board did at Eastern High School. And it was not just board members, it was the Office of State Student Advocate, the Ombudsman team, and the SBOE team at Eastern High School. And so the board does this to really present information. So it's an opportunity to really engage the public. And it could be an opportunity for our committees to have sort of that face-to-face time with the public. Last year, there were 70 to 80 people registered. That was last year, and it was in person at Eastern High School. I've shown here last year's run of shows, so you get a sense of what it was like if you did not attend one of those sessions or you were not on the board. And so you can review all of that, but I wanted to put it in front of you and just really to think about, this was a long day from 9:30 to 2 on a Saturday. Is there an option? Would we like to do shorter versions of this and maybe do at the very least 2, one in person and one virtual, or if we want to have more than 2, but to think about that. And looking at dates in October and early November, if you have any blackout dates, to send those to me as soon as humanly possible. But just really wanted to create a space to discuss, particularly for members who were not on the board. Last year when this engagement happens, 2 questions. 1, can some of the veteran board members share feedback and their experience as if this was a worthwhile, or if there's something you would keep or change? And 2, does the board want to do this again collectively? Is this an endeavor that staff should spend time planning, but just knowing that last year that the bulk of the planning was led by a board committee on outreach, which does not exist anymore. That's what the email's saying. That's why I said, can veteran board members share feedback and experience? That's the first.
I can, try it. Although I wasn't on the board, I did attend the session, and I thought that it was, even though the day was long, I thought that it was a really good opportunity to learn what was going on and to provide some like input and feedback on different things. I think one of the challenges is there were so many like different rooms that you can go to, but you only could fit, I think, like 3 or 4 within that day. And so, you know, maybe having the opportunity to do 2 would be amazing because, quite frankly, there were, you know, other areas that I wish I would have also been able to attend.
That makes sense to me. Sorry, I didn't do right. I wait. I wait because I didn't do right.
Vice President O'Leary.
I went to them and I've been to several of them. I think we need to have one on the east side and one on the west side. I think the problem we had with it being at Eastern, and also there was also an event going on with football field at Eastern on the same day. There was also another event going on at the, I had trouble getting in, I forgot what it was. Do you remember what it was?
I don't, but I do remember there was a long line and people thought that they
It
had
was
to go
about
to that line.
immunizations.
Oh, it was, yeah, that's exactly what it was.
What?
Immunization for the athletics.
It doesn't matter what it was.
But if we have one at, I will sort of throwing out Roosevelt as a, close to the metro. Have one on the other side of the road. But I think it's important to have, I don't know if you should do it 2 of them on the same day. It probably doesn't make any sense. But to give it availability to the community. Because what we did find out at that meeting at Eastern, a lot of people had no idea what the state board of education. And so it was very informative. It was very helpful to the team. We want to have more people who provided good food and hung around for lunch. It needs to be more practical. It's conception.
So I have President Thompson, Representative Chang, Representative Goulet, and then Representative Patterson.
So I have a couple of thoughts. So one of the things that we were trying to balance is, I remember there were certain board members who felt very strongly that like everybody needed a chance to go to everything. And then there were some board members who like, it's okay for people to pick and choose. I will say now, having been through it, I just think there's a point of like saturation of like where it's just like I cannot participate any longer, right? And so I think it's okay to have less sessions or like be able to choose, like, you know, like if we could focus ourselves as far as like what do we actually want engagement on now, that might be helpful in not feeling like people are like, oh, I didn't get a chance to go to this, but also not like alone as long of a day. I thought it was helpful to have different, like do it as one, because there were people who might have come because they knew the board was doing one piece of work, but they had no idea that the other pieces of the work were happening. And so they were like, oh, I knew y'all were doing this, but I didn't know y'all were thinking of, y'all were about to do something with literacy, or I didn't know, and like Brandon came to, was one of the participants in the governance session, right? Like, so they might have come for one reason, which I think also helped as far as diversifying the feedback we get, because I feel like people, the same group show up for the same things. And it just helped as far as the participation and getting different points of view on different matter before the board. I also think it was a good push for us to hold our own engagements. I think that's something that's important to do, both because I think Representative O'Leary said it, like some people came and they didn't know anything about the board. I would imagine if you don't know anything about the board, you definitely don't know anything about the board's work, but I also think it's important for us to have opportunities where we are going out into the community to talk about our work and engage people about our work, just like we ask everybody else to do. And so I don't think this is the end all be all for that, but I do think this is one thing we should continuously do. To say like, hey, here's what's coming up before, like, here's what we're gonna need your feedback on. And having it go across. I did not think the food was good, so I don't ever, I don't want those subs again. The food was not good at all. Oh, and we could not help, and this is just a DGS thing. We had no, they don't tell, like, you can reserve a space, but that does not mean they tell you anything about what is happening in the space. So that's not something we can control for when we use like city spaces, which we are probably going to. Unless maybe we connected with the person on site somehow, like maybe we could figure that out, but that's all.
We have Chang and then Goulet and then Patterson.
I agree. I would vote for fewer of these and not cut it. Similar to what we were saying. I think that for me it's the trade-off, right? The amount of time that it's taken staff to put something on for quite very few people to attend. I think if the goal is to maximize the number of people, it's better for us to tack on to another event and be there and be a part of something else that's already happening where they're attracting people. The goal is to introduce ourselves, and there are way better ways for us to do it, way more cost-effective ways to do it than to host our own event like this. And if the goal is to get into a deeper conversation, I think it's also, activate the roundtables and have a much more conversation about a specific topic that the last 2 years of the engagements that I've been a part of, I think have been incredibly stressful for the staff, very low turnout. I don't think food alone will get more people to come out. I think we have to change what we use for this kind of engagement, and if food is the only way to get people out, then we're going to some point.
Goulet, Patterson. Thank you, Representative Chang.
I like the idea of piggybacking on other events, so we have the booth there. But also like the idea of just having like maybe something that where multiple members get together on an issue or something, and just go to different schools and have discussions or something, have like a SBOE speaking or get to know these series or something like that. I mean, I'm all for anything that builds up the institution, but if it's not tied to something specific, I don't know if it's going to show up. So I think if it's on the report cards, that's exciting. Like maybe we'll get people on the report cards to do a couple of sessions on that. If it's on, I know it's not directly under us, but it's going to be a huge issue. It's the boundary study in the MFP this year. Maybe something on that where we just tell people about the process, tell them what's going on, and what our role is, what it isn't on that. And I mean, I just don't. If you're going to go to all this work and set all this up, but what's that going to come of it? I mean, the only other way to think of doing it, which would be kind of the opposite direction, would be what the Power Ed did, where you have, and if you have people come in for a short period of time, and you could have each of us in like almost a complete. Maybe we go to that event where there was different like subject matter experts, and you could kind of just mill around and get to meet each person and talk about a specific issue. That was kind of a fun event and moved quickly. And you didn't have to, I don't know that they fed anybody there. It was just going to be came as you came out. Was there food? I missed the food. It was a really good thing. So, but I don't know.
He's like, no, there was food.
It's like, I just don't know what that's going to get us in terms of building our brand name. Pretty if you get like 10 or 15 people showing up. I'm up for whatever you're going to do.
Well, it's not me, it's really, if you guys don't want to do this, then I don't do it. But it's really up for the board to discussion because it's not a staff activity. Yeah.
Is there a way to kind of like help coordinate it with like back to school events? I feel like there's a lot of things that come up for parents and families like back to school, and I'm wondering if we could do it that way, and then engage people with kind of like how their summer was, thinking about like involving them with inputs, like what's top of mind for them at the start of the school year, and they might have more interest, and see more of the rationale at that point of time rather than like later on.
I'm sorry. Representative Patterson was in the queue, but the staff has captured that. That's okay.
Couple of things. I thought they were. But we also have to come out of COVID, so attendance was going to be what it was. That was a lot of it. As far as attendance for me, and from hearing from people who wanted to come, it's just we were just coming out of COVID, so people were still kind of leery about how much they were going to attend. I'd also say that we picked 2 schools. It does not have to be a school. Specifically when you're going to Morday. I think that when we said we're only going to be at the school, that kind of limited where people want to go. Some of these people weren't used to coming to the particular schools that we chose, 2 schools that we chose. So that limited some of the participation as well. Like if you're going to look east of the river, one of the places that everybody uses east of the river is the Rise Demonstration Center. It's used very heavily. Whenever you have an event in Ward 8, everybody knows you use this Rise Demonstration Center, and everybody turns out. You know, regardless of if they have 7 or 8, that's where you're going to get people to come. Parking's easy. It's a place that everybody knows. So we have to be cognizant of what we choose, and it does not have to be a school to get the participation. Also, what I noticed is that it was DCPS heavy and charter light. I think that had to do with selection. So most of your attendees were mostly DCPS. There wasn't a whole bunch of charter attendees, nor did the subjects really talk. Even though we did the report card, charter schools don't see the report card as something that really affects them because they have the PCSB framework. So when we're talking about, you know, half of our schools, nearly half of our schools are charter schools, we have to make sure that the subject matter is sexy to both sides of our ecosystem. Those are the types of things that I came away from, you know, in the meeting, that those things stuck out to me is who attended, why they attended, where they were located, that affected how many people came out, and some of the branding that we wanted. I do agree with you. President Thompson, the food was not that great.
It wasn't good.
We had so much left over at the one site that we were giving to anybody who walked out on Walter by, the janitor included. And so we wasted a lot of money on food. I remember they were like, "Jock, take 6 home, give it." It was tough. But those are the things that I came away really understanding, because I really tried to go to each session and try to see who was attending and the type of questions that they were asking, since me and representative at that time, Wattenberg, was chairing that meeting. So I got to walk around and attend some of the other meetings. So that helped me to kind of get abreast of what people were thinking and what they were saying and who was in each session. So just wanted to make sure we look at those.
Representative Best, and then we'll go back to Representative Thompson.
Yeah, so as we're thinking about our engagements in general, I think that we have to adopt the mindset that this group can't just do it alone. And we have to consider partnering with other organizations, whether it's PTOs, mom groups, community organizations, DCPS, LEAs, education councils, nonprofits, collaboratives. Like all of these organizations have groups that they work with, and they have people who come out. Quite frankly, this isn't our area of strength. And so if we believe in the notion, if you build it, they'll come, you're sadly mistaken. And so I think that we need to, in general, as we start to think about our engagements, we have to start to plan out strategically who are our partners in our engagements, so that we can collaboratively do these with our community, so we can drive attendance. That's all.
We have President Thompson, Vice President O'Leary.
I think I have 2 separate thoughts. So the first thought is actually about the point about strength. I agree with you that we should look at partners, and I think partners. But I also think I don't know how we can seriously or authentically say we are going to be a public voice in education without building better capacity around engagement and getting feedback. So I do think it is both we need to partner with people, and we need to figure out what are some of the things to immediately like buoy ourselves. And I think we have to build some better muscles. Like I don't really like, yeah, I think that's important. I don't know what all of those things are, but that is that's my point of view at the moment. I will say that as far as the topics, I think one of the questions that I don't know the answer to, and I guess it goes back to both like the questions around like the length of the day, what would people want to engage around is, for me, one of the reasons you do an engagement is like a discussion session. Is like, are there things that actually genuinely would benefit from discussion at this point in time? Not that they all have to be in the same place in the work, but like, I don't know, and I would need to like look across, and I would want, if we decided to do this, I think a big part of the equation is like, how does it like authentically engage people in our work? Because what no one likes, whether it's because you stop them for 10 minutes outside of the grocery store or because they sat down with you for 2 hours, is when you say to them, give me your feedback on this thing. And like you wasted their time because you don't use the feedback. And so I that is a different part that I think we're gonna have to like flesh out a bit more. But like a primary question for me is like, what are we engaging people around to use in our work? And I think that's actually really, and not that there's nothing, but like I would want us to be clear on that. But I do think that it is worth us building some muscles.
So right now I have Representative O'Leary, Representative Chang. Is there anyone else before we gonna, oh. We have Representative Goulet, and then we'll go to Dr. Fleischer. Dr. O'Leary?
Talking about organizations that are involved in education. We need to have paid and empower it working together with us for an engagement session. You think about our meetings. Empower it and pay. You go to an empower it event, and it's a whole lot of people. Go to a paid event, and it's a whole lot of people there. But they're like, what, too much about physics, but whatever the magnetic force is like that, you know, they're not attracting each other. But that's how we would get people. If we could get empowered and paid to co-sponsor an event about the report card, we have like 300 or 400 people.
I'm sorry, Dr. Lear, I disagree. I think the reason why they have people who show up to their events is they're very intentional about the purpose.
Oh, I understand.
And
But that's
why
I was doing this.
And they invite folks to our engagement events. They've been very active in promoting our events to their constituents. I don't think that is the issue. I think actually, your assessment of where we are right now, President Thompson, I don't think we need to build engagement for engagement's sake around the board. I think we should build engagement around the topics that we're working on, because that's what actually people are interested in. People are not interested in the board, right? Which I think is the framing of some of these events, right? But and to actually think we're quite good when we're very intentional about getting feedback on, like, if it's you know, for the literacy work, it's been very specific for us around reading instructors, school librarians, families K-5 first, right? And being very intentional about, hey, here, what has your experience been if we make these changes? What feedback would you give? People feel that they have experience to share that's relevant, and that the actual recommendation would change their particular experience. And I think people want to engage around those things. If we're shouting out into the void of everyone in the city, please engage around the board of ed, I don't see how we ever make that engagement, right? But if we focused it around something like the report card, but we were very intentional around what is the purpose, right? And who are the constituents that we need to engage with? Why is their voice particularly important? And we invited them and found the right place and time all of those stakeholders to actually have a conversation about this in a productive way. I think that would be really engaging. But I don't think that's engaging around the whole.
So we have,
I agree completely with what you just said.
we have Representative Boulay, and then we're gonna end with Darren.
I'm trying to channel my thoughts. That was exactly, I mean, if we could do this on the report cards and make it interesting, like what we have is we say, here's the framework for the report cards, look at these issues. What issues do you think we should change? What do you think looks like a fair report card? And do this in some sort of interesting way where people kind of come in, feel like they're putting in feedback that matters, like the way Paige did their thing just recently. Where they put their 2 agenda items out for the new year. That was interesting. There was everybody at those tables felt like they were engaged, they were making a difference. And if you created it where you kind of show them what the report card looks like right now for the schools, individual schools, show them what it could look like, show them what other factors they may want to consider, and then we'll get some new ideas from them. That would be pretty interesting, I think, because everybody would have opinions about what makes a good school. Like, and that could be what we title, what makes a good school. Like what makes success, and then we get people. I'm not that creative about this stuff, but get somebody who's really creative about selling stuff, and I mean that'd be something fun. And then you invite all the groups like Dave and Power at those folks to come to it, and they would want to give us their feedback about what makes a great school. What should be in those report cards? I can sell that. We'll sell it. Get one of these. I mean, even Roosevelt, we'll get Word 3 coming to Roosevelt. We'll do it. I think we could do that.
Way rather that than just, hey, come and listen to me talk about literacy to this kind of nebulous group.
Oh, yeah, that's not.
Thank you. Dr. Fleischer.
So I've been going to a lot of the unity, like back to school events, things like that. I see a lot of you there, and there is a lot. The people who don't know about the state board have a lot of interest in it. When I explain to them, we have our booths and our one-pagers, and I quickly just explain who we are and kind of give them like a little grab bag or whatever. But part of it is sharing out what we're doing, but also who we are is a huge part of it. So that was just one thing I want to throw out, is that there is an interest, and participating in these events is, I think, really important, and you get a lot of bang for your buck. I think a lot of people sign up, they get the emails, and they have interest. The second thing is when I show up, the ombudsman's office, OSA are also there, and we feed off of each other. So I'll send people to their tables, they'll send them to us. So that's like a huge part of that too. We could get people interested and know, oh, right, like when I'm at this event, it's like state board's having their own event on this date. You can also get that out there. Also about OMB, OSA, they have their ears to the ground. Whenever I talk to them, like at the paid event, they're like, we're going to this block party tomorrow. They have their ear to the ground. All these things are going on in the city. So they're a great resource and something to catch up with. And then Malaya will be proud of me to share this out. But going to these things, I think, at least for me, having better talking points, especially if we're doing work around the report card or whatever, all members would have the same talking points so that wherever we go, people will have the same message. And that's just something that I can do a better job when I go to these events to be like, okay, boom, 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 hit all these things, let people know, and then have these email addresses to things like that. So it's just invaluable going to community events or events. And people show up because there's food, there's a lot of things going on. So I don't think it gets lost.
So in terms of next steps and hearing everyone's feedback, we will, staff is taking notes and minutes, and a list of action items is really summarizing this feedback and position you all to make some decisions about what happens in the fall. I think that is the next step, and you can get that over email and
respond that way so that we can decide how we're gonna move forward. But this was the type of conversation I wanted to have, the type of engagement that, I mean, we wanted to hear from you all, the varying perspectives. So thank you for your feedback and your inputs and your thoughts. This was super helpful. I am done, President Thompson.
All right, thank you. Thank you, members, for engaging, and compliments to Dr. Fletcher, because I have seen you in action, and you and the ombudsman and the student advocacy office do a wonderful job of representing us, and thank you for coming to board 7 without it. Discussion to remove restraint and seclusion in schools. Representative Bernstein.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. I'm gonna just give some background information on the topic that relates to the school community well-being. Is that what the committee's called? School Community Well-being Committee. And see if it's just something the board might be interested in working on. This isn't forwarding like a substantive piece of work that I think we should do, just an issue that I've noticed. And I'm wondering if the board's interested in working on it, and then if it should then go to that committee to see if it can be added to the work plan. So basically, I'm talking about restraint and seclusion as it relates to school discipline policies. Seclusion is the involuntary confinement of a student in a room from which the student is physically prevented from leaving. That does not include things like exclusionary timeouts, which are temporary, continuously monitored separations of students from ongoing activity in a non-locked setting for the purpose of calming such student or de-escalating such student's behavior. And then there's restraint, which refers to just restraint or mechanical restraint, which is using any device or equipment to restrict students' freedom of movement, not including vehicle safety restraints like car seats or medical devices that students might need in schools for different reasons. So basically, restraint and seclusion are things that are legally allowed to be used in school discipline measures in DC because there's no regulations on them. We only have regulations on corporal punishment, which is slightly different because our regulations outline that outline certain ways in which corporal punishment may be used, but that becomes kind of nullified if these methods of restraint and seclusion are in students' individualized educational plans, which is really why I'm bringing this up. Nationally, students under IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, make up about 12% of our student population, but they represent 7% of those subjected to restraint or seclusion, and they also accounted for 75% of those who experienced physical restraint and 58% of those who were subjected to seclusion. I'm really just presenting today to see if this is something the board would be interested in working on, and kind of either having DC eliminate this and not allow it to be in IEPs or create some kind of regulation. While there are federal regulations to protect students with disabilities from discriminatory practices in discipline, those are concerned with the fair application of discipline and not actually like restrictions regarding specific forms of punishment. We know that these tactics are often physically and mentally violent. Students should not be regularly restrained or secluded if they don't have to be, but oftentimes if these are in IEPs, they will be used as a first response method because it's easier if it's listed out in the student's program or the student's individualized education plan. So that's really it. It's pretty simple. I was just wondering if this is something the board would be interested in taking on or sending to the school community well-being committee.
How much of this is connected to punishment? Like school, versus I guess how much of it is related to some of the broader school security questions?
I think somewhat, because a lot of times, especially for like restraint, we see that being like, specific people in the building that are trained to do certain things. But the issue becomes when students have it in their IEPs, more than just the people that are trained to do those things end up doing those things. So I think the restraint piece definitely has kind of more crossover between those two pieces of work. The seclusion thing is more of just a punishment thing. While it might, have other aspects of school safety as a part of it, that's really just like especially for students, like certain schools might have certain facilities that are specifically dedicated to those things. So I think that there's some cross application, but a lot of it is directly related to punishment, or like the term is like discipline, because some of it's just like supposed to be like regulating behavior, but we also know that this isn't a proper way to teach students about regulating their own like behavioral issues.
So, can
So I was a former special education teacher and SPED coordinator. And so I know when it came to restraints, we did have like rules over not only like who could provide restraints also, but like what were acceptable restraints. So I want to, I'm listening to what you're saying. And I want to do a little bit more research as far as like what are other rules that are, because I'm literally looking at a manual right now for DCPS's restraint and seclusion policy. And so I just want to make sure I can actually dive into it. Definitely want to like look into it, but I want to make sure that I also do all the research around like what is currently in place versus what is not in place, as well as you know, for me, just I know that seclusion and restraints were not in my time when I was working, which was a while ago. It's a long time ago. It was definitely not one of the first things that we went to, but I do think that it is worth us looking into as far as seeing what policies are there.
Yeah, I think that's a few great points in there. I think first, since DCPS does have some guidance around it, especially as it relates to things like corporal punishment and how those two might overlap. But since we have so many LEAs, a lot of charter schools are left with the ability to kind of make their own guidance, and which we know, like, if you're not, especially if you're not specialized in like disability, like you might not be able to properly like make those guidelines. And that a lot of places don't use restraint and seclusion, which is really great, and a lot of places don't have it in IEPs, which is also super important. But there are like, I think that it's important when there are regulatory gaps to make sure that they're filled, even if it's not common practice, so that it doesn't become common practice. And I think especially, you know, with places like where there might not be an abundance of teachers who are trained to work in special education, especially who might think like, you know, you might think it's the logical first response in some instances. And I'm not saying that sometimes like there are obviously extenuating circumstances in which that warrant responses different from methods that I think you should always rely on, like especially if the safety of many of our students is like at risk, but this shouldn't be something you rely on or shouldn't be in IEPs. And so I think that it's just like noting like there might be a regulatory gap here as it relates to across the whole district. But a lot of our corporal punishment regulations do kind of overlap in this area. So I see this as kind of more similar to seizure safe schools, where it's not really under any of our statutory responsibilities, but that we can kind of mention a few things that might be helpful. Like I know like Connecticut has some pretty good guidelines on this that outline what everything is that we could like look at.
You send us the stuff,
Yeah.
please.
I wasn't next though. I raised my hand, but somebody had raised their hand before me.
I just want to echo what you said, Representative Best. I'd like to see what the best practices are here in DC. Really hear from special education experts on it. The one thing that worries me a bit is since our jurisdiction is over public education, like if we remove restraint and seclusion in schools, but there are some instances, and hopefully rare instances of student safety, where that's part of best practice for that student.
We do have regulations like about corporal punishment that apply here that allow that. So extenuating circumstances, you can use it if it meets a few different standards.
And I just want to make sure we're not pushing more kids to private out-of-state placements or private placements, but by making it so that they can't get their needs met in schools. I'm really interested in the subject, but I want to make sure we're doing best practice and not eliminating something that is not done to punish kids, but for the safety of kids. And I just don't know enough about it, but I'm interested in the topic, and I'll certainly follow your lead on what you would find out.
Well, I was gonna share, and I think I said this to you, Representative Bernstein, when we talked about this. I see this as. What did I say? I'm just joking with you. Because you posed it as a question. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so I think I shared this with you when we talked about this. I see it as different this easier safe schools, not because, it's not as far as the relation to like our statutory responsibilities, but in just like how the work, like the level of work we would need to do in order to have something actionable. I see it similar to the sexual assault, when sexual assault was brought up, and it's like, okay, we're having some issues, and we need to get clearer on like what schools' responses should be, and I say that because there were specific activities that we had to outline in figuring out what we needed to include, whether it be from things we've seen that are like national best practices, things we know that are like in federal statutes already, or things that are currently happening in the district that we should say, like you mentioned, DCPS has this, but that doesn't mean every charter has this. And so I think that some of those, if this was something the board was going to explore, or and I guess we would talk about when that would happen, because there's always a question of when all these things are going to happen. Some of the steps that we took to get to actionable resolution in sexual assault would be something we could point to. Again, not that it has to be exactly that, but like having a starting place to like what activities could we undertake to flesh this out.
And this, I'll note, and I'm gonna send out more stuff, especially from the DRDC. This topic specifically, like there is a lot of kind of hard data that exists about it, but like a lot of other topics that we encounter, this is more based on like student experiences. And so I didn't want to just list off like, here's this student and this bad thing happened and then this student. So I'll make sure to share those so that folks who are interested can kind of have a more in-depth look. But I think I agree with you, Representative Thompson. I was just more relating to like what I envision like our relationship to it. So it's not like we can't just be like, oh, let's do this thing as a board and we all agree.
And that's why I said I agree with it in that aspect. But like I wanted to point us to how we've, because I think we have built, I think there's a path forward. So and I would say it's also similar in the way to like to your point about like not just listing out bad things that have happened to people.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's also a very sensitive experience that you don't want to just go like, here's this example of when this happened to the So thank you.
But this was just to garner interest and kind of put it on the table, since obviously I'm not going to be doing this work because I'm leaving, but just to know that folks were interested in thinking about this, or if the committee was interested in working on it.
I believe the next one, so there's one more, Representative Goulet, I see busing.
Yes. Does everybody have this comments to the bus resolution? I was grateful they sent these comments in, so we wanted a chance to look through them. I'll just make some quick comments because I looked through each of their comments. Most of these can be incorporated rather easily, most are technical. I just want to go through the ones that I felt were technical and were just easy changes. I'll move quickly because we're getting away for short on time. The one issue that I am struggling with here is they pushed back on the idea of kids like not having to be out there within 3 minutes of buses arrive, because they said that's going to push the wait times back further. So there, and I'm going to try to work on this over the next couple of days, but there's a dynamic here where you had some students who are waiting outside. I got calls from parents on this for an extended period of time. The kid then, either because of weather conditions, or they needed the restroom or something, went back inside, which for a kid with significant disabilities can be a time-consuming process. The bus showed up in the meantime, no notification, the bus takes off after the kid had been sitting out there for a long time. So there's got to be some sort of balance here. I don't want buses having to wait forever. Yes.
I want you to finish.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't want the kids to have to wait forever, but at the same time, I do feel like there's got to be some balance here where they're not just taking off after the kid's been out there for a while. So I will change that language. It doesn't, obviously, they pointed out, we're not saying that the student has to wait outside the whole time. Nobody said that, but for students, oftentimes if it takes a while, they do want to wait outside for the bus. And that's one issue. There's two other substantive issues they raised.
I'm sorry, Mr. Representative Glenn, could you state like the number so that we could follow along in the comments?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's line 67.
1,
When I'm
2, 3, and 4 were all just technical things that we can easily incorporate. Those are easy. GA5 and GA6 were the first time this came up. And then on the other side, it comes up again. GA16 and GA17. This is the issue of the students. You know, and what balance do we strike? I don't want the kids to have to, you know, miss the bus because they waited so long that they had to go back inside and use the restroom. You know, at the same time, I don't want to stretch this out, you know, so that the buses are late. So I think maybe some sort of middle ground on this policy would be helpful. I'm going to try to talk to some of the parents over the weekend about this who have experienced this again, just to hear from them. But others may have heard from parents about the issue. But it's a push and pull. Ossie is saying it's not a problem, but I think for parents it is a problem. The other two issues on here that are substantive are numbers GA15 and GA18. This was a recommendation by parents that the bus driver, if they were going to be late, should be able to have a number that they can text just to let them know, hey, I'm running late. This is my time. I'm going to be there. Ossie pushes back on that and says it's a student safety issue. They don't want bus attendants to be contacting individuals or making phone calls while driving students. So I do see that point. At the same time, having a GPS system or something where the parents can see the bus is coming would be helpful. Because again, this is all about timing. If a parent is trying to juggle multiple things and get a student with special needs out to get the bus, that can be a time-consuming process. And it's helpful to know when the bus is coming. We expect that from Omada bus. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect it from Ossie buses either. So that's another thing that I want to work with them on. And then finally, the only other thing that they pointed out, they said there was no, do I have any evidence, and it seemed like conjecture, to say teachers and staff had to work overtime to care for students who are not picked up from school at a timely manner. I have heard stories about that, but I'm going to get some specific examples just so we can then say to Ossie, here's some cases in which that did occur. I think everything else is non-problematic that they raised. I mean, they made certain points like that we requested that there be an IT system set up that would allow for better communications with Ossie between parents and students. They said that would take a number of years to do that. I don't think that's a reason not to recommend. I think as long as, you know, that we want to see that system that parents want. I mean, the rest of this stuff is really just technical. It can simply be a couple wording changes. And but those are the three issues really is, you know, how do we balance the waiting outside versus the on buses? So, President Thompson, I'll turn it back to you.
That is most palatable to Ossie. I think the things I find helpful are when they raise things that are like, this could be more accurate or this is right. So like if there are things that can be cleaned up or to your point, like there might be specific incidences where they might say this is inaccurate, but you know, runs counter to the, like those things make it like, so we have a resolution that is as reflective of the current experience as possible. I think is important. I would note that the things where they say like we disagree with this, we can, I mean, it's good to know that they disagree, but I don't think that means that, again, that we have to address them in a way that is like to make them agree. I don't, my expectation is that when people come to us, like the Corbett's who said like, could we do this? If that is something that the board sees as a larger issue that could be addressed, that we would include it and we would call attention to it, right? I think if there are specific solutions that we would like to point out, like the one you raised around the IT system and like, if that's something we believe in as a solution, the adjustment would be to incorporate it as a solution that OSSI should take up. But I do, I did want to share like how I think about what our task is here to getting to final. It's not like make sure all of these changes are met as they are requested.
So like, I think the perfect example of that, of where they said on like 20 and 21 on the first page, I mean, they just made the point to say, we all know that not every student with special needs has transportation. They just wanted us to clarify that here. There's no problem in doing so. I always understood anyways, but if they want that clarification, like, I'm glad to make those changes to it. But I just, I do appreciate what they did, but I agree with you that it shouldn't be necessarily giving them everything that they requested. This is the parents that felt very strongly about it.
I don't think you see your hand.
Oh.
You say it now.
I agree. I think if there's anything that they say is inaccurate and that we can't substantiate that it is in fact accurate, then we need to accommodate that, but the rest, I think if I understand the structure of one of these correctly, like the whereas is where we put in like the evidence that we, like what we've heard, and to just address it there. Like for the, we don't have any evidence of this. If you're able to find those things, put it in the whereas. And I think that haven't they been working on an IT system or?
I think so. They were saying it wasn't funded, so I think they need to get funded.
Well, maybe we can call for funding.
Right. I mean, I don't think so. For like it is our resolution, right? And we, of course, when there are things that are like, we're gonna pass it, like our what do you call it? Public meeting materials, as it should be, are public, right? And then we go to meetings with the different agencies. Of course, I'm not gonna be like, oh yeah, we're not, like, like, it's like, oh, we are passing this resolution. It's like, well, we have thoughts about that. And I'm like, okay, fine, you can share your thoughts, but that is still our resolution and calling for what we would like to see. I think the only, so I would be redundant if I go on, but if there are other things that members think are important to add here, because it's not like the exercise is, this is ready when everything is responded, all these comments from ASIA responded to. It literally is like, this is ready when the board has come to a certain level of consensus around it being ready. So that's the other reason it's on the, like, that is the larger reason that it's on the agenda is, are there other discussion points that people want to raise or put on the table for Representative Boulay as he prepares the final version of this. It's not, are these the right things from us? You know what I mean? Like that's not the scope.
So I'll be glad to certainly revise draft everybody of this, just so that they can see it. And from substantive issues, just give people a resolution of those, just to make sure that those are good for folks. Sorry, I
Just requesting that we have some leads.
Yeah, for sure. I'll get that done this weekend, get that to you guys. And I mean, certain things will be easy, like if they made a comment to say, like, we requested they host listening sessions with families. I mean, they made a comment, feel free to leave it in, but for your awareness, we've already agreed to do this. Well, I'm gonna leave it in. Yeah, I mean, obviously we want them to do that, so we're gonna leave that in. But if there's anything where there's a question about something, I'll make sure that we get back to you guys and you can see it. If anybody's got feedback, I haven't figured out an answer on what the right timing is for the kids waiting outside versus, what the right metric is for that. So if anybody's got thoughts on that, please let me know.
I would lean on what the young person told us, which is he was like, I remember specifically him saying it would be helpful if it moves from 3 to 5 minutes. I don't think that was overly burdensome. And so that would be my suggestion. Yeah, I think, but I do want to be clear, we need some, next Wednesday, I mean, 2 Wednesdays. When do we need to have the ceremonial resolution done? When is the deadline?
The ceremonial or the statutory?
Oh, sorry, this is statutory resolution. When do we have, yes, when is the?
The
this is
deadline,
done?
yes. So the meeting is
Alright.
done Wednesday, the 19th. The Thursday before that, we would like to have them so that we can post them on Friday. So not to, yes, and we'll send it to the board as soon as we get it.
I would say, like, if we can arrive at a technical, like maybe with the exception of, like, yeah, they said 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Just, I would fall back to a more general, the principle that we're trying to meet with certain.
Is that all, Representative Blair, on the resolution?
Yes,
Right.
you know, if people think things later, send them to me by email, because I want to make sure we get all the member feedback.
All right, these last three are for me. The statutory resolution, for the ombudsman, interim ombudsman appointment, so you all have that. I think we've discussed the general amount about like how we got here. I do want to leave space for if there were any, like, because I've been processing other things, if you are like, and we should think about this, or whatever. I want to leave space for that now, as far as either feedback on language of the resolution or questions, comments, concerns about anything that's been raised. Okay. I know we've had a couple points to talk about this, but if you do see things or think of things, it is on SharePoint. We will note the comments. The last two are ceremonial. So there is also draft ceremonial, like, no. Oh, to the office, okay. I was like, I knew there was a thing. I'm not.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay. Okay, so the ombudsman, so I'm like, I know there's a draft. There's a draft. It has gone to the ombudsman staff because they work most closely with Serena. If there are things that, you know, it's not in front of you today, that you want to make sure are noted to recognize Serena, let us know. Similar to, most recently, we did a resolution for Alex, was probably the most recent one. There will be time at the working session, I mean, at the public meeting for people to say all the nice things.
And she will be there. She's already put it on her calendar.
Similarly, ceremonial resolution for our own Representative Bernstein. If there are nice things that you would like to have in that resolution, send them to Darren so she could be surprised. And then think of the nice things you want to say to her face while we are on the dais. But those are the last three resolutions to take us home. Are there any questions or comments around any of those? All right, hearing no further discussion and there being no new business items, I do want to thank members for their time, attention, engagement this evening. This has been a very meaty meeting, so thank you all for hanging in there. The board, a reminder to the viewing public, the board will continue to hold these meetings in person. We will convene our July public meeting on July 19th in the old council chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. Seeing no further business before the board, I will entertain and welcome a motion to adjourn. All right. I heard it properly moved and seconded. I heard it. I wasn't gonna not hear it. The meeting of the state board is adjourned at 8:35 p.m. on July 5th, 2023. Thank you all.
Speaking with you, are you gonna be back?
If I don't sleep good tonight, well, we'll see how these fireworks go. But